Hello guys, welcome to Muse Fanfiction. So in this video, we will see what if the Potters sealed Harry's god-tier bloodline and it unleashed hell on his abusers at age 7. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Shattered Crucible. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like old socks and bleach. Harry Potter had catalogued every scent in this cramped darkness over the years, the must of aging wood, the sharp bite of cleaning products Aunt Petunia shoved in with him after his chores, the faint metallic tang of his own blood when he'd bitten his lip to keep from screaming. He knew the exact number of steps from the cupboard to the kitchen, 12, the precise squeak of the third floorboard outside Dudley's room, and the particular cadence of Uncle Vernon's boots on the linoleum that meant he was angry. Harry knew all of these things the way a mouse knows the patterns of the cat that hunts it. On the morning of his 7th birthday, Harry woke before dawn. Not because he wanted to, he never wanted to leave the thin blanket that was his only comfort, but because his body had learned to rise early. Early meant he could finish his chores before Dudley woke. Early meant he might avoid the casual backhand or the creative insults Vernon liked to invent over breakfast. Early meant survival. He pressed his palm against the cupboard wall, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his fingers. Something was different today. Not in the house hummed with its usual pre-dawn silence, but in him. There was a heat beneath his skin, a pressure behind his eyes, like a headache that hadn't quite formed. Harry ignored it. He was very good at ignoring things. The kitchen was cold when he padded across the tile floor. His bare feet made no sound. He'd learned to move silently years ago, after Vernon had caught him sneaking a crust of bread and locked him in the cupboard for 3 days. Harry didn't think about those 3 days anymore. He didn't think about a lot of things. He started the coffee maker because Aunt Petunia liked her coffee ready when she came downstairs. He set out 3 plates, one for Vernon, one for Petunia, one for Dudley, because setting out 4 would have been a joke, and jokes meant punishment. He measured the coffee grounds carefully, cracked the eggs into the bowl for Petunia's omelette, and arranged the bacon strips in the cast-iron pan with military precision. His small hands moved automatically, his mind carefully blank. The heat beneath his skin pulsed once, twice. Harry paused over the stove, a strip of raw bacon dangling from his fingers. What was that? The thought came unbidden, sharp and clear, and Harry immediately crushed it. Questions were dangerous. Questions led to wandering attention, which led to burnt toast, which led to Vernon's belt. He refocused on the bacon, laying each strip perfectly parallel to the others. The sizzle of fat hitting hot iron. The smell of breakfast filling the kitchen. The familiar rhythm of invisibility. But the heat remained. A living thing coiled somewhere behind his sternum, stretching and settling like a cat finding a comfortable position. By the time the Dursleys came downstairs, Harry had breakfast ready, the table set, and himself positioned in the corner between the refrigerator and the wall, present enough to refill orange juice but invisible enough to be forgotten. It was his spot. He'd stood there for so many meals that the linoleum had worn slightly beneath his feet. "Good morning, Dudders," Petunia chirped as Dudley thundered down the stairs. At 7 years old, Dudley Dursley was already the size of most 11-year-olds, a walking monument to excess. His blonde hair stuck up in greasy spikes, and his small eyes were bright with the anticipation of presents. Harry counted in his head. 37. That was how many presents Dudley was expecting, based on the tower of wrapped boxes Harry had glimpsed in the sitting room last night. He'd counted them while scrubbing the baseboards, a task Petunia had assigned because those freakish eyes of yours can see the dirt better. "Is it my birthday yet?" Dudley demanded, though he knew full well it was. The question was theatrical, designed to prompt the ritual. "It's your special day, sweetums," Petunia cooed, bending to kiss Dudley's forehead. 7 years old. "My little man." Vernon appeared in the kitchen doorway, his massive frame blocking the light from the hallway. He was already dressed in his work clothes, a button-down shirt straining over his belly, a tie that seemed too short for his thick neck. His mustache twitched as he surveyed the kitchen, his gaze sliding over Harry like he was a piece of furniture. "Smells good, Petunia." "That's my coffee," Petunia said, gesturing toward the percolator. She didn't look at Harry as she said it, but they all knew who had made it. "Boy, pour your uncle's coffee." Harry moved 2 steps to the counter, hands steady as he lifted the carafe, poured the steaming black liquid into the largest mug, Vernon's favorite, with "World's Best Dad" printed on the side in gold letters, a gift from Petunia last Christmas. 2 steps to the table. Set the mug down exactly 3 inches from Vernon's plate. Retreat to the corner. The routine was a dance Harry knew by heart. It was almost comforting, in the way that a prisoner might find comfort in the predictability of their cell. Vernon took a long sip of coffee, grunted approval, and unfolded the morning paper. "Anything special planned for the boy today?" "Dudley wants to go to the zoo," Petunia said, sliding an omelette onto Vernon's plate. "And then his favorite for dinner, roast beef with those little potatoes he likes." "And cake?" "Chocolate. 3 layers." Dudley was already tearing into his bacon with both hands, grease running down his chin. "I want to see the snakes," he said around a mouthful of food. "The big ones. The ones that eat things." Harry's chest gave another strange pulse, stronger this time. He pressed his hand against his ribs, trying to suppress it. The sensation was like a second heartbeat, out of sync with the first, and it was getting harder to ignore. "Whatever Dutters wants," Vernon boomed, lowering his paper to beam at his son. "It's your special day. Nothing's too good for my boy." Harry knew what came next. It was part of the ritual, as predictable as the sunrise. Vernon's eyes would find him, still beaming from the affection directed at Dudley, and the smile would curdle into something else. Not quite hatred. Hatred required acknowledging that Harry was a person. It was more like disgust. The reflexive revulsion one might feel toward a spider in the bathtub. "And where will you be?" Vernon asked, the warmth draining from his voice. "Mrs. Figg's?" Harry nodded, not meeting Vernon's eyes. "Yes, Uncle Vernon." "Good. Don't want you ruining Dudley's day with your freakishness." Vernon said the word casually, as if it were a statement of fact rather than an insult. "Mrs. Figg's been told not to let you out of her sight." The heat in Harry's chest surged again, and this time, the coffee pot rattled on the counter. Everyone froze. Harry stared at the pot, his heart hammering. He hadn't touched it. He was standing 4 feet away, back pressed against the wall, and yet the carafe had definitely rattled. He'd seen it. They'd all seen it. Petunia's face had gone the color of old milk. "Vernon, just a tremor," Vernon said, but his voice had lost its bluster. His eyes, small and piggy, fixed on Harry with something that looked almost like fear. An old house. Settling. But they all knew it wasn't the house. The Dursleys might not understand Harry's strangeness, but they recognized it. The inexplicable occurrences that clustered around him like persistent flies. The time Petunia had shaved his head in punishment, only for his hair to regrow overnight. The way plants in the garden toward him sat just slightly toward him, as if drawn by an invisible sun. The incident with the boa constrictor at the zoo 2 years ago, which no one spoke about but no one had forgotten. "Go to your cupboard," Petunia said, her voice high and tight. "Stay there until we leave." Harry didn't argue. He never did. He slipped out of the kitchen and into the hallway, his bare feet silent on the wood floor. The cupboard door opened and closed behind him, and he was back in the darkness, surrounded by the smell of socks and bleach and the pulsing heat beneath his skin. He sat on his cot, a thin mattress laid over wooden slats, with one flat pillow and a blanket that was too short to cover his feet, and pressed both hands against his chest. The heat was definitely there now, a physical presence that seemed to be growing stronger by the minute. It didn't hurt, exactly. It was more like the ache of a muscle that had been cramped for too long finally beginning to stretch. What's happening to me? The question terrified him because he had no framework for it. The Dursleys had told him, repeatedly and with great conviction, that his parents had died in a car crash. That his father had been a drunk, his mother a worthless freeloader, and that Harry himself was a burden taken in only out of charity and Christian duty. They had never mentioned magic or strangeness or power hidden in blood. All they had given him was the cupboard, the chores, and the certainty that he was less than nothing. But the heat was real. The rattling coffee pot was real. And deep in some part of himself Harry had never dared examine, he knew the Dursleys were wrong about him. They had to be. Because if they were right, if he truly was nothing more than a worthless freak, then nothing in the world made sense, and every moment of pain he'd endured was simply the natural order of things. The cupboard door swung open without warning. Petunia stood silhouetted against the hallway light, her angular frame rigid with tension. "There's a letter for you." Harry blinked. A what?" "You heard me." She thrust a cream-colored envelope toward him, holding it between two fingers as if it might be contaminated. It was on the doorstep. No stamp. No return address. Just your name and this address. Harry took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was thick and heavy, like nothing he'd ever held before. His name was written on the front in emerald green ink, the letters elegant and flowing, Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging Surrey, the cupboard. It actually said the cupboard. Someone out there knew exactly where he slept, and they thought it was important enough to write down. For the first time in his 7 years of life, Harry Potter felt something other than fear, other than hunger, other than the bone-deep loneliness of a child who has never been held. He felt curiosity. And beneath that, a fragile, terrifying thing that might have been hope. "Open it," Petunia snapped. "I want to see what it says." Harry's fingers found the wax seal, a crest of some kind, with a lion and a snake and a badger and a bird all arranged around a letter H. The wax was purple, shot through with gold veins that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the cupboard. The heat in his chest roared. The envelope exploded. Not in fire, there was no smoke, no scorching of paper. But the seal shattered like glass, fragments of wax dissolving into motes of golden light that swirled around Harry's hands. The envelope itself became a page, and the page unfolded into words, and the words began to speak in a voice that was not sound but something deeper, something that resonated in the spaces between his bones. "Harry James Potter, firstborn of the House of Potter, bearer of the primacy, undimmed, the blood remembers, the blood awakens, the seal is not eternal." And then the voice was gone, and the page was gone, and Harry was left holding nothing but air, and the fading afterimage of golden light burned into his retinas. Petunia made a sound like a teakettle reaching boil. Her face had gone from milk-white to corpse-gray, and her thin hands were pressed against her mouth as if she were trying to hold something inside. Her eyes, Harry had never noticed how much her eyes looked like his mother's eyes, from the one photograph he'd managed to glimpse, were filled with naked terror. "What did it say?" she hissed. "What did it say?" "I don't," Harry started, but the words died in his throat. Because he did know. Somehow, impossibly, he knew exactly what the letter had said. The words were carved into his memory like inscriptions on stone. "Vernon." Petunia's scream cut through the house. "Vernon, come here." The thunder of footsteps. Dudley's voice from the kitchen, "Mummy. Mummy, what's wrong?" And then Vernon was filling the hallway, his bulk blotting out the light, his face already purpling with the familiar signs of impending rage. "What's happened? What's the freak done now?" There was a letter. Petunia's voice was barely above a whisper. "From one of them. It knew where he sleeps, Vernon. It knew about the cupboard." The color drained from Vernon's face, leaving behind something ugly and frightened. He looked at Harry, really looked at him, not through him or around him, and what Harry saw in his uncle's eyes made the heat in his chest pull stronger. "Give it to me." Vernon's hand shot out, meaty fingers grabbing at Harry's empty palms. The letter. Whatever it was. Give it here. It's gone, Harry stammered. It disappeared. There was light, and words, and then, the first blow caught him across the face before he could finish. Vernon's hand was large enough to cover the entire side of Harry's head, and the impact sent him crashing against the cupboard wall. Pain exploded behind his eyes, bright and immediate, but somehow distant, as if it were happening to someone else, someone Harry was merely observing from a safe remove. Liar! Vernon roared. What did it say? Who sent it? What have you been doing, you miserable little freak? Harry couldn't answer. The heat was building, a pressure that was becoming unbearable. It pushed against his skin from the inside, demanding release, demanding expression, demanding something Harry had no name for. Vernon hit him again. A backhand this time, catching Harry across the mouth. Blood filled his mouth, hot and metallic. Vernon, Petunia started, but her voice was uncertain. No more. Vernon was shouting now, his face inches from Harry's, spittle flying with every word. 7 years we've sheltered you. 7 years we've put food in your mouth and a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us. Consorting with those abnormalities. After everything we've done to stamp that nonsense out of you. The third blow didn't land. Harry didn't know how it happened. One moment, Vernon's fist was descending toward his face. The next, Vernon was frozen in place, his arms suspended in mid-air, his piggy eyes wide with disbelief. The air around them had thickened somehow, turned golden and syrupy, and in the sudden silence, Harry could hear his own heartbeat. Not the frantic rabbiting of fear, but something slow and powerful, a rhythm like a war drum building toward a crescendo. Let go, something whispered. It wasn't the voice from the letter. It was older, deeper, something that had been sleeping at the bottom of his soul for 7 years and was only now beginning to stir. Let go, little one. You don't have to take this anymore. Harry's mouth opened, but what came out wasn't words. It was light. Golden fire erupted from his body, pouring out of his eyes and mouth and fingertips, flooding the hallway with radiance so bright that Petunia screamed and threw her arm over her face. The fire didn't burn, at least, not in any conventional sense. It passed through the walls and furniture like sunlight through glass, leaving them untouched. But when it touched Vernon Dursley, the big man convulsed as if electrocuted. You, Vernon choked out, his frozen arm trembling. What are you? And then the fire found him completely, and Vernon Dursley began to scream. It wasn't a scream of physical pain. Harry understood that instinctively, even through the chaos of light and sound and the terrible pressure that was finally releasing from his chest. The fire wasn't burning Vernon's body. It was burning through something else, something deeper. It was peeling back the layers of the man like pages in a book, exposing every cruel word, every petty tyranny, every moment of casual brutality that Vernon had ever inflicted on the small, dark-haired boy who slept in a cupboard. And Vernon was seeing it. All of it. Laid bare in the merciless light of Harry's awakening power. Please, Vernon's voice cracked, all the bluster drained away. Please, stop, but Harry couldn't stop. The fire was coming from somewhere beyond his control, pouring through him like water through a broken dam. He felt the cupboard disintegrate around him, not physically, but in some other sense, as if the walls that had contained him for 7 years were dissolving into their component memories. Every tear he'd shed in the darkness. Every bruise he'd hidden. Every night he'd fallen asleep whispering to a mother and father who could never answer. The fire found Petunia next. Horse-faced, sour Petunia, who had looked at her orphan nephew and seen only her dead sister's reproach. Who had poured her grief and guilt into cruelty, convincing herself that if she could just make the boy small enough, invisible enough, normal enough, then maybe the pain of losing Lily would finally stop. The fire showed her this, and Petunia fell to her knees, tears streaming down her angular face as decades of carefully constructed self-deception crumbled around her. "No," she whispered. "No, I didn't, I was trying to, Lily, please." Harry felt her grief like a physical blow. It was staggering, the depth of it, a wound that had festered for so long it had become indistinguishable from the woman herself. He hadn't known. How could he have known? To him, Aunt Petunia was simply the woman who had locked him in cupboards and called him names. He'd never imagined there was more to her than that. But there was. The fire showed him everything, and for the first time, Harry understood that cruelty was rarely simple. He didn't want to understand. Understanding felt like forgiveness, and Harry wasn't ready to forgive. The fire was still roaring through him, and a part of him, a dark, vengeful part he hadn't known existed, wanted to let it burn. Wanted to make them feel everything they'd ever done to him, magnified 1,000-fold. Wanted to show them what it felt like to be small and helpless and utterly at the mercy of something that didn't care whether you lived or died. The fire responded to that darkness. It surged hotter, brighter, and the Dursleys' screams intensified. Even Dudley, who had wandered into the hallway and was now pinned against the wall by the golden light, was crying, great heaving sobs that shook his massive frame. The fire was showing Dudley things too, every stolen toy, every cruel taunt, every time he'd laughed while his father hit his cousin. Harry could feel the fire's hunger. It wanted to go further. Wanted to burrow into the very essence of these three people and rewrite them, reshape them, remake them into something that could never hurt anyone ever again. It would be so easy. The power was right there, thrumming through his veins like liquid sunlight, and all he had to do was, no. The thought was small, barely a whisper against the roaring tide of power. But it was his. Entirely his. He thought of the Dursleys. Vernon, who had beaten him. Petunia, who had starved him. Dudley, who had hunted him like an animal for sport. They deserved punishment. Maybe they even deserved this specific punishment, this forced confrontation with their own ugliness. But Harry thought of something else, too. He thought of what it felt like to be helpless. To be trapped in a small, dark space with no way out, at the mercy of someone who could hurt you without consequence. If he let the fire consume them completely, how was he any different? The struggle was the hardest thing Harry had ever done. Harder than any chore, any punishment, any night spent hungry and cold in the cupboard. The power wanted to flow, wanted to express itself, and forcing it back felt like trying to stop a river with his bare hands. But Harry had spent 7 years learning to suppress himself. 7 years making himself small enough to survive. And that skill, honed in darkness and fear, turned out to be exactly what he needed. The fire began to recede. It didn't go out, Harry could still feel it burning beneath his skin, banked but not extinguished, but it withdrew from the Dursleys. The golden light faded, leaving the family crumpled against the walls of the hallway. They were conscious, Harry saw, but their eyes were glassy and distant, still trapped in whatever visions the fire had conjured. Vernon was weeping silently, tears cutting tracks through the coarse stubble on his cheeks. Petunia was curled into a fetal position, her hands over her ears. Dudley simply stared at nothing, his face slack. The hallway was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Harry stood in the center of it all. He was shaking, whether from cold or shock or the aftermath of the power's release, he couldn't tell. His mouth tasted like copper and ozone. His eyes felt strange, as if they'd been recalibrated to see in a spectrum of light he'd never known existed. He looked at his hands. They were his hands. Small. Scarred from cooking accidents. Nails bitten down to the quick. But there was something different about them now. A faint luminescence pulsed beneath the skin, visible only if he looked closely. What am I? The question had no answer. The letter had called him bearer of the primacy, but those words meant nothing to him. He was just Harry. Just the boy in the cupboard. Just the freak who made weird things happen. Except he wasn't, was he? The boy in the cupboard couldn't have done what he'd just done. The boy in the cupboard would have taken Vernon's beating and retreated to his dark corner to lick his wounds, grateful that it hadn't been worse. The boy who stood in the hallway now was something else entirely. Harry took a step toward the front door. His legs felt unsteady, like a newborn colt's, but they held. The Dursleys didn't move, didn't even seem to notice his passage. Whatever visions held them, they were deep. The doorknob was cool under his fingers. He turned it, pulled the door open, and stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness of Privet Drive. The neighborhood was perfectly still. Perfectly normal. Rows of identical houses with identical gardens and identical cars in the driveways, all of them fast asleep. Not a single light in any window. Not a single soul aware that something extraordinary had just occurred at number 4. Harry walked. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay where he was. The Dursleys' house, which had been his prison for 7 years, now felt like a trap he'd barely escaped. If he stayed, they would wake up eventually. And when they did, they would look at him with even more fear and hatred than before. They might not hurt him, the fire had shown them too much for that, but they would never, ever see him as anything other than a monster. He couldn't bear that. He'd spent his whole life being a monster in their eyes. Now that he knew what he truly was, he couldn't go back to pretending. The streetlights flickered as he passed beneath them. One by one, the bulbs flared bright and then died, plunging the sidewalk into patches of shadow. Harry noticed but didn't stop. The power was still leaking out of him, he realized. Still finding ways to express itself, even without conscious direction. He needed to understand. He needed to know what the letter had meant, what the fire was, why this power had been sealed inside him and who had done the sealing. The words echoed in his mind, the blood remembers. The blood awakens. The seal is not eternal. A seal. Something had been sealed inside him. Something that was now awake. Harry's steps quickened. He was at the end of Privet Drive now, where the street opened onto a small park. It was the same park where Dudley and his gang liked to hunt him, chasing him behind the swings and the slide until they got bored or until Harry found a hiding place small enough for his skinny frame. He knew every inch of this park, every bush, every bench, every hollow in the old oak tree where he'd once spent an entire afternoon while Dudley searched for him. But tonight, the park felt different. There was a presence here. Something waiting. Harry stopped walking. The power beneath his skin pulsed, and in response, a shape detached itself from the shadows near the duck pond. It was an owl, an enormous thing, easily the size of a small dog, with feathers the color of old bone and eyes that gleamed like amber coals. It was the most ancient-looking creature Harry had ever seen, its feathers ruffled and tattered, one of its talons chipped. But there was something unmistakably aware in those amber eyes. Something that looked at Harry and recognized him. Who? Harry started, but the owl had already launched itself into the air. It didn't fly away, instead, it circled him once, twice, and then began drifting toward the far end of the park, its flight slow and deliberate, as if it expected him to follow. Harry hesitated. This was insane. Following a strange bird in the middle of the night, with no idea where he was going or why. That was something out of a fairy tale. That was exactly the kind of freakish behavior the Dursleys would have punished him for. But the Dursleys weren't here. For the first time in 7 years, Harry was completely, terrifyingly free. He followed the owl. It led him to a cluster of oak trees at the edge of the park, where the grass grew long and the shadows pooled thick. Harry had hidden here often, wedging himself into the hollow of the largest tree, but he'd never noticed what the owl was now showing him, a small, weathered trunk half buried in the earth at the base of the oak. The trunk was made of dark wood, reinforced with brass fittings that had long since gone green with age. There were no handles, no hinges that Harry could see, only a single crest carved into the lid. The Potter crest. Harry knew it instantly, though he'd never seen it before. The knowledge was simply there, as if the crest had been waiting in his blood for the moment it would be recognized. A stag, rampant, framed by a crescent moon and a lily flower. The stag's antlers were tipped with gold that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The owl landed on the trunk and regarded him solemnly. "Is this, mine?" Harry whispered. The owl blinked its amber eyes. Then it reached down with its chipped talon and rapped sharply on the crest, 3 times. The trunk opened. Harry stumbled backward, his heart pounding. But the trunk didn't explode or dissolve or pour out golden fire. It simply opened, like any other container, its lid swinging back to reveal an interior that was somehow larger than the exterior. Much larger. Harry could see stairs descending into a space lit by warm lamplight, the beginning of what looked like a small room. And then the light grew brighter, and 2 figures resolved out of the glow. 2 figures that made Harry's knees buckle and his eyes fill with tears he hadn't known he was capable of shedding. A man and a woman. The man was tall and dark-haired, with glasses perched crookedly on his nose and a smile that was somehow both mischievous and sad. The woman had red hair and green eyes, Harry's eyes, he realized, exactly his eyes, and a face that was beautiful not in the way of Petunia's pinched elegance, but in a way that radiated warmth and strength. Mum. Dad. The word tore itself from somewhere deep in Harry's chest, a place that had been locked and barred for as long as he could remember. He had never called anyone that. Petunia had made it very clear that he was not to call her anything except Aunt. But these 2 people, he knew them. He knew them, not from photographs or stories, but from the shape of his own soul. "Mum," he whispered. "Dad." The figures solidified, becoming something halfway between ghosts and living presences. They didn't float, their feet touched the ground, but there was a translucence to them, a quality of light shining through flesh, that marked them as not quite alive. James Potter, because that was his name, Harry knew it with absolute certainty, looked at his son with an expression of fierce, desperate love. "Harry. Oh, Harry. You've grown so much." Lily Potter was already moving toward him, her hands outstretched. "My baby. My sweet, brave boy. We're so sorry. We're so sorry." Harry tried to speak, but no words came. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times in the darkness of his cupboard, the day his parents would come back for him, would take him away from the Dursleys and love him and explain that it had all been a terrible mistake. But he had never imagined it like this. He had never imagined them as ghosts. "You died," he managed finally. "The car crash." "There was no car crash," James said, and his voice was hard now, edged with old anger. "That was a lie the Dursleys told you. We died fighting, Harry. We died protecting you from a monster who wanted to end our family's bloodline forever." Lily had reached him now. Her hand, when she placed it on his cheek, was cool and insubstantial, but Harry felt it like a brand. "And before we died," she said softly, "we sealed your power. The power of our bloodline. The primacy." The word resonated in Harry's bones. "The letter," it said, "we know what it said." James knelt so that he was at Harry's eye level. "The seal is broken, son. We felt it shatter. And if we felt it." He glanced at Lily, and something passed between them, a shared fear that made Harry's stomach clench. "If we felt it, then so did they." "Who's they?" Harry asked. But even as the question left his lips, the owl let out a piercing shriek. The sound cut through the night like a blade, and Harry felt the power beneath his skin surge in response. Something was coming. Something that made even the ghostly forms of his parents flicker with alarm. Lily's hand tightened on Harry's shoulder, he felt it, impossibly, as a pressure of heat and light. "The custodians," she said, and her voice was urgent now, stripped of all the warmth that had been there moments before. "The order we belonged to, before we learned the truth. They've been watching for you, Harry. Waiting for the seal to break. And now that it has, They will come for you. They will try to capture you, contain you, maybe even, Lily. James's voice was sharp. We don't have time. He turned to Harry, and his expression was the expression of a man who had faced impossible choices before and would face them again. Son. Listen to me. The seal is gone. The primacy is awake. That means you are in more danger than you've ever been in, but it also means you have the power to survive it. You need to run. Right now. You need to get to Gringotts, the Goblin Bank, and invoke the right of sanctuary. Say those exact words, right of sanctuary under the ancient pacts. Do you understand? Harry didn't understand. The words were a jumble in his head, custodians, primacy, goblin banks, ancient pacts, but he understood his father's tone. He understood the fear in his mother's eyes. Whatever was coming, it was worse than the Dursleys. Worse than anything he'd ever faced. I don't know where Gringotts is, he said, and his voice sounded very small. London. Lily pressed something into his hand, a small, silver coin that hummed with warmth. We'll guide you as much as we can, but our time is short. The echoes we left in this trunk are fading, and once they're gone, we can't come back. Not until you find a way to call us, James added. And you will, Harry. I know you will. You're our son. You're a Potter. And Potters don't give up. In the distance, Harry heard something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't a sound so much as the absence of sound, a spreading silence that swallowed the rustle of leaves and the chirp of crickets and even the distant hum of traffic on the motorway. The world was going quiet, and the quiet was moving toward him. The owl shrieked again and took flight, its ancient wings beating frantically as it vanished into the night sky. The ghostly forms of James and Lily began to flicker, their outlines blurring at the edges. Go, Lily said. Run, Harry. Run before the custodians find you. Because they will not make the mistake of mercy a second time. The coin will show you the way, James called, his voice already fading. Trust it. Trust yourself. And remember, the primacy is not your enemy. It's your birthright. It will try to overwhelm you, but you are stronger than it is. You've survived 7 years of hell in that house. That took more strength than any magic ever could. Dad, Harry reached out, but his hand passed through James's form. We love you, Lily said, and her eyes, his eyes, were bright with tears. We have always loved you. Never doubt that. And then they were gone. The lamplight in the trunk winked out, and the lid swung shut with a definitive thud, and Harry was alone in the darkness of the park with the silence closing in around him. He ran. The coin in his hand pulsed with warmth, tugging him forward like a compass needle finding north. He didn't know where he was going, didn't know what Gringotts was or how a bank could possibly help him, but he knew that his parents had sacrificed themselves to give him this chance. He wasn't going to waste it. Behind him, the silence continued to spread. Harry didn't look back. He didn't want to see what was making that silence. He just ran, his bare feet pounding against the pavement, the silver coin throbbing in his palm, the power in his blood singing with a terrible, beautiful song that was only just beginning. The night swallowed him whole, and the hunt began. Chapter 2, Inheritance of Ashes. The coin burned cold in Harry's palm. Not the gentle warmth he'd felt in the park, that had been a compass, a guide, a whisper of direction. This was different. This was a warning. He'd been running for what felt like hours, his bare feet slapping against pavement that grew rougher and more cracked the further he got from Privet Drive. Little Whinging had given way to suburban sprawl, then to industrial estates with their shuttered warehouses and chain-link fences, and now to something older. The streets here were narrow and winding, lined with buildings that seemed to lean inward like conspirators sharing secrets. The street lamps were iron instead of steel, their bulbs flickering with orange light that reminded Harry of the owl's amber eyes. The coin was trying to tell him something. The cold pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, 3 quick pulses, then a pause, then 3 more. A pattern. A signal. Harry stopped running and pressed himself against a brick wall, his chest heaving. The power beneath his skin had settled somewhat during the run, banked like coals in a fireplace, but he could feel it stirring again now. Responding to the warning in the coin. Responding to something else, too, something that had been following him since he'd left the park. The silence. It was still there, at the edges of his perception. Not as close as it had been, but not far enough away for comfort. Whatever was creating that silence, whatever had made his parents' shades flicker with fear, it was hunting him. And it was patient. Trust the coin, his father had said. It will show you the way. Harry uncurled his fingers and looked at the silver disc resting in his palm. It was larger than any Muggle coin he'd seen, and heavier, its surface inscribed with symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves as he watched. At the center was the Potter crest, the stag, the moon, the lily, but surrounding it was a ring of text in a language Harry didn't recognize. The letters glowed faintly blue. As he stared at the coin, the symbols resolved into a single arrow pointing down the street. Then the arrow flickered, twisted, and became a map, a miniature rendering of the streets around him, with his position marked by a pulsing dot of gold light. His destination was marked in silver, a building shaped like a lopsided triangle, wedged between two larger structures. Gringotts. It had to be. Harry pushed himself off the wall and started moving again, following the coin's guidance. His feet were bleeding now, he'd stepped on something sharp a few blocks back, but the pain felt distant, muffled. The power was doing something to his perception, he realized. Not numbing him, exactly, but prioritizing. It was as if his body had decided that physical discomfort was irrelevant compared to the need to keep moving. The streets grew stranger the further he went. The buildings here didn't quite match. A Victorian townhouse next to what looked like a medieval tavern, a glass and steel office block wedged between two Tudor-fronted shops. And there were people, or at least figures that looked like people, moving through the shadows in ways that weren't quite right. A woman in a cloak that billowed without wind. A man whose silhouette was too tall, too thin, his joints bending in directions human joints shouldn't bend. Harry kept his head down and walked faster. The coin's map led him to a pub. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside, a grimy, forgotten sort of place squeezed between a bookshop and a record store, its sign so caked with soot that Harry couldn't read the name. The windows were dark, the door was heavy oak banded with iron, and there was absolutely nothing about it that suggested Wizarding Bank. But the coin was insistent. The Potter crest was glowing steadily now, and the arrow pointed directly at the pub's entrance. Harry hesitated. This was the Leaky Cauldron, he knew the name suddenly, the way he'd known the Potter crest, pulled from some well of knowledge buried in his blood. He didn't know how he knew. He didn't know how any of this worked. But standing in the dark street with bleeding feet and a power he couldn't control roiling beneath his skin, he didn't have many options. He pushed open the door. The interior of the Leaky Cauldron was exactly as grim as its exterior suggested. Low ceilings blackened with centuries of smoke. A fire crackling in a hearth large enough to roast a pig. Tables scattered across a stone floor, occupied by figures who looked up as Harry entered, and then looked away just as quickly, their expressions flickering with something between recognition and fear. The barkeep was a hunched man with a bald pate and a face like a friendly walnut. He was polishing a glass with a rag that looked dirtier than the glass itself, and when he saw Harry, his eyes widened. Merlin's beard, he breathed. Don't, Harry said. He didn't know why he said it, only that the barkeep's recognition felt dangerous. The power flared beneath his skin, and the fire in the hearth flared with it, sending sparks shooting up the chimney. The barkeep's mouth snapped shut. Several patrons suddenly found their drinks intensely interesting. Harry crossed the room, following the coin's pull toward a door at the back. It led to a small, walled courtyard with nothing but a few empty barrels and a pile of rubbish. The coin's map indicated he should stop here, at a section of wall that looked exactly like every other section of wall. Now what? Harry muttered. The coin pulsed. And the wall began to move. Bricks slid and rearranged themselves, grinding against each other with a sound like stone teeth chewing. Harry stumbled backward, his heart hammering, as an archway formed in the wall, opening onto a street that blazed with light and noise and color. Diagon Alley. Harry had never seen anything like it. The street was packed with witches and wizards in robes of every color imaginable, bustling between shops that sold cauldrons and broomsticks and spellbooks and things Harry had no names for. Owls hooted from cages outside a shop called Elop's Owl Emporium. A goblin, an actual goblin, with pointed ears and long fingers and a face that was all sharp angles, hurried past, carrying a stack of parchment. Children pressed their noses against the window of quality Quidditch supplies, pointing at the brooms displayed there. For a moment, Harry forgot about the silence pursuing him. He forgot about the Dursleys, the cupboard, the golden fire that had nearly consumed him. He was 7 years old, and he was looking at a world that made sense of everything strange and wrong and inexplicable about his life. He stepped through the archway, and it sealed behind him with a grinding of brick. The crowd didn't part for him, not exactly. But as Harry walked down Diagon Alley, he noticed that people moved out of his way without seeming to realize they were doing it. A wizard arguing with a shopkeeper about the price of dragon liver would step aside a moment before Harry passed. A witch examining a display of crystal balls would turn her body just enough to create a gap. It was subtler than the Power's earlier display at the Dursleys, but it was unmistakably the same thing. The primacy was making space for him whether he wanted it to or not. The bone-white marble edifice of Gringotts rose at the end of the street, taller than any building Harry had ever seen. It made the surrounding shops look like toys, its columns and archways radiating a quiet, absolute authority. Goblins flanked the bronze doors, wearing uniforms of scarlet and gold, their dark eyes watching the crowd with expressions of cool appraisal. Harry climbed the marble steps. The goblins looked at him, and unlike the humans in the leaky cauldron, they didn't look away. Their eyes tracked him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "State your business," one of them said. Its voice was a rasp, like stones grinding together. "I need to invoke the right of sanctuary," Harry said, repeating the words his father had given him. "Under the ancient pacts." The goblins went very still. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the one who had addressed him, it wore a small silver badge on its uniform, identifying it as a senior guard, turned to its companion and spoke in a language Harry didn't recognize. The companion nodded once and vanished through the bronze doors. "Wait here," the guard said. Harry waited. The coin was still pulsing in his hand, the cold deeper now. The silence that had been hunting him was drawing closer, he could feel it like a pressure change in the air, the way you could feel a storm building before the first clouds appeared. The bronze doors swung open. The guard's companion had returned, and with it was another goblin, older, its face deeply lined, its uniform more ornate. Gold rings glittered on its long fingers, and its eyes were the color of old coins. "Harry Potter," the goblin said. It wasn't a question. "I am Griphook, Senior Account Manager of the Ancient Houses Division. You have requested the right of sanctuary. Do you understand what that means?" "No," Harry admitted. "I only know what my father told me. That I needed to say those words, and that Gringotts could help me." Griphook's expression flickered, surprise, maybe, or curiosity. "Your father. James Potter has been dead for 7 years. I know. He came back. Him and my mum. They were in a trunk, and they told me to come here." The goblins exchanged glances. The guard's hand moved toward the short sword at its belt, but Griphook raised a finger, and the movement stopped. "The Potter Vault contains many artifacts," Griphook said slowly. "A memory trunk would not be beyond the family's resources. But the fact that it activated suggests interesting things about your current situation." He paused, studying Harry with those coin-colored eyes. "You are pursued." It wasn't a question. Harry nodded. There's something following me. It's been following me since I left the park. My parents they called them custodians. This time, the reaction was unmistakable. Griphook's face didn't change. Harry suspected goblin faces didn't change much, but the guard actually took a step backward, and its hand closed fully around the sword hilt. You are certain of this? Griphook asked. The custodians have not been seen in the open for centuries. I'm not certain of anything, Harry said. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know what the primacy is, or why my parents sealed it, or why these custodians want to hurt me. I just know that my mum and dad told me to come here and ask for sanctuary, and I'm asking. Griphook was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, a single sharp movement. Come with me. The right of sanctuary must be invoked in the deep vaults, before the Stone of Oaths. And if what you say about the custodians is true, we must move quickly. Their authority does not extend to goblin soil, but they have never been overly concerned with jurisdiction. He turned and strode through the bronze doors, moving with the clicking gait of someone accustomed to navigating underground spaces. Harry followed, acutely aware of the guards falling into step behind him. The interior of Gringotts was vast. A cavernous hall stretched out before them, lined with counters where goblins conducted business with wizards and witches. Chandeliers of crystal and gold hung from the ceiling, their light reflecting off marble floors polished to a mirror shine. And at the far end of the hall, behind a desk larger than Harry's entire cupboard, sat what could only be the bank's director, an ancient goblin with a wizened face and eyes that gleamed like black diamonds. The director didn't speak as they passed, but Harry felt its gaze on him. Felt it measuring him, weighing him, categorizing him in ways he couldn't begin to understand. Griphook led him to a door behind the main counter, then down a corridor that sloped sharply downward. The marble walls gave way to rough-hewn stone, the chandeliers to torches burning with green flame. Harry heard something in the distance, a grinding sound, like enormous gears turning, punctuated by the occasional shriek that might have been wind or might have been something else entirely. The carts, Griphook said, noting Harry's expression. They travel the deep tracks, where the old vaults are. You'll be riding one soon enough. Riding? The vaults of the ancient houses are not accessible by foot. Too deep. Too dangerous. The tracks were carved through solid bedrock over 1,000 years ago, and they have been expanded since then. Griphook's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Goblins are very good at expanding things. They reached a platform carved into the stone, where a small cart sat on iron rails that disappeared into a tunnel so dark it seemed to swallow the torchlight. Griphook gestured for Harry to climb in, then settled himself in the front with the ease of long practice. The two guards took positions at the rear. Hold on, Griphook advised. The descent is rapid. Harry barely had time to grip the sides of the cart before it lurched into motion. The tunnel walls blurred past, the green torchlight streaking into lines. The cart tilted downward at an angle that seemed impossible, and Harry felt his stomach drop as they plunged into the depths. He didn't scream. He wanted to, every instinct told him to, but the power inside him surged in response to the speed, and suddenly the terror transformed into something else. Something that felt almost like joy. This, the power seemed to whisper. This is what we are. Motion. Change. The rejection of stasis. The cart hurtled through junctions and around curves, past waterfalls of glowing minerals and chasms that dropped into darkness without visible bottom. Other tracks crossed theirs, carrying other carts with other goblins, all of them moving at the same breakneck speed. Harry caught glimpses of massive vault doors set into the stone, each one inscribed with symbols as old as Gringotts itself. After what felt like an hour but was probably no more than 10 minutes, the cart began to slow. They emerged into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor dominated by a single structure, a circular platform of black stone, in the center of which stood an obelisk that pulsed with an inner light. The Stone of Oaths. Griphook climbed out of the cart and approached the platform with evident reverence. "This is the oldest place in Gringotts," he said. "Older than the bank itself. Older than the wizard's ministry. When the first goblins dug into these mountains, they found this stone waiting for them. It had been waiting for a very long time." Harry climbed out of the cart and approached the obelisk. Up close, he could see that the stone's surface was covered in writing, thousands of names, carved so small they were almost microscopic, layered over each other in a palimpsest of oaths going back millennia. "The right of sanctuary was established in the Second Age," Griphook continued. "When the wars between magical beings threatened to annihilate every intelligent species on the planet. The ancient pacts were forged here, on this stone, and they bind all who invoke them, goblin, wizard, or otherwise. What do I have to do? Place your hand on the stone and speak your name. The stone will recognize your blood. If you are who your father's shade claims you are, the sanctuary will be granted. For 3 days, no harm may come to you within goblin territory. No custodian, no dark wizard, no creature of any realm may touch you without breaking the pacts themselves." Griphook's eyes glittered. "And the penalty for breaking the pacts is not something anyone sane would risk." Harry hesitated. 3 days. That was all the sanctuary would buy him, 3 days to figure out what was happening to him, why the custodians were hunting him, and what he was supposed to do about any of it. It didn't feel like enough. It felt like barely anything at all. But 3 days was better than no days. 3 days was better than being caught by whatever was currently spreading its silence through the streets of London. He stepped onto the platform and placed his palm against the obelisk. The stone was cold, and then it was hot, and then it was neither. It was something beyond temperature, a sensation that bypassed his skin entirely and went straight to the power coiled in his chest. The obelisk blazed with light, and Harry felt something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman turn its attention toward him. "Speak," a voice said. It wasn't sound. It was the impression of sound, the memory of words spoken before language existed. "Harry James Potter," Harry said. His voice echoed in the cavern, amplified by some acoustic property he couldn't identify. "I invoke the right of sanctuary under the ancient pacts." The obelisk flared brighter. The names carved into its surface began to glow, thousands upon thousands of them, and Harry felt his own name being added to that vast record, not carved by any physical tool, but etched directly into the stone's memory by the power that dwelt within it. And then the light died, and the cavern was silent, and Harry knew with absolute certainty that the sanctuary had been granted. He also knew something else. Something the obelisk had shown him in the moment of connection. "There's something in my scar," he said. Griphook, who had been watching the ritual with an expression of professional satisfaction, went still. "What do you mean?" "My scar. The one on my forehead." Harry touched it, the lightning bolt shape that had been there for as long as he could remember, the mark the Dursleys had always told him came from the car crash that killed his parents. "When the stone touched me, it showed me. There's something in there. Something that doesn't belong to me." Griphook's face didn't change, but his fingers twitched toward the rings on his hand, an unconscious gesture that Harry suspected was the goblin equivalent of a gasp. "That scar," he said slowly. "The one shaped like lightning. It's famous in the wizarding world. Every witch and wizard knows its origin. The Dursleys said it came from a car crash. The Dursleys lied." Griphook's voice was flat. "Your scar came from a Dark Lord. A wizard who called himself Voldemort. He killed your parents and tried to kill you, but when he turned his wand on you, the curse rebounded. Destroyed his body. Left nothing but that mark on your forehead." Harry absorbed this information with a strange sense of detachment. He'd always known, on some level, that the Dursleys' car crash story was a lie. He'd dreamed of green light and high laughter and his mother's voice screaming for him to run. But hearing it confirmed, hearing that his parents had been murdered, that someone had tried to murder him, should have felt different. Should have felt like something breaking. Instead, It felt like something finally falling into place. The stone showed me more than that, Harry said. There's a piece of him in me. Voldemort. A piece of his soul got stuck in my scar when the curse rebounded. It's been there this whole time. Griphook stared at him. That's not possible. Soul magic of that nature, the creation of a Horcrux, if that's what you're describing, requires deliberate ritual. It can't happen by accident. I don't think it was an accident. I think. Harry paused, trying to grasp a concept the obelisk had planted in his mind, a seed of knowledge that was just beginning to sprout. I think the primacy did something. When the curse hit me, when he tried to kill me, the power inside me, it grabbed hold of the curse. Grabbed hold of him. It pulled a piece of his soul into me as a kind of anchor. A way to track him. A way to make sure he couldn't disappear completely. The words were coming out before Harry fully understood them, but as he spoke, he realized they were true. The primacy had been sealed, suppressed, dormant, but even dormant, it had acted to preserve itself. It had taken the darkest magic ever cast against the Potter bloodline and transformed it into a tool. A tool that someone else had been using. The custodians, Harry said, and his voice was very quiet. They knew about the soul shard. They've been using it. Using me. For 7 years, they've been tracking me through this thing in my head, waiting for the seal to break. Griphook's expression shifted. For the first time since Harry had met him, the goblin looked genuinely unsettled. If that's true, then the sanctuary may not be enough. The ancient pacts prevent direct harm, but they cannot prevent surveillance. If the custodians have been monitoring you through your own scar, then they already know I'm here. Harry looked up at the cavern ceiling, as if he could see through the miles of rock to the surface above. They're not going to attack Gringotts. You said the ancient pacts would stop them. But they'll wait. 3 days, and then I have to leave, and they'll be right there. It is probable, Griphook admitted. Harry thought about the silence spreading through London. About his parents' shades flickering with fear. About Cassiel, the name they'd mentioned, the leader of the custodians, whoever or whatever that was. Then I need to use these 3 days, he said. I need to understand what the primacy is, why it's so dangerous, why my parents sealed it. And I need to figure out how to control it, because right now, it's controlling me. Griphook studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, the goblin laughed, a dry, rasping sound like stones rubbing together. You are very like your father. James Potter came to Gringotts 7 years ago, just before his death. He was panicked, desperate, but beneath the panic was that same thing I see in you now. The thing that refuses to be beaten. You knew my father. I knew of him. The Potters are an ancient house. My clan has managed their accounts for 3 centuries. Griphook paused. Your father didn't invoke sanctuary. He invoked something else, the sealing protocols. He withdrew certain artifacts from the family vault and placed them under bloodlock, keyed to open only when your power awakened. The trunk, Harry said. The one with their shades in it. That, and other things. Your parents prepared for this moment, Harry Potter. They knew the seal might break. They knew the custodians would come for you. And they left you tools to survive. Harry felt something loosen in his chest. Not the power, that was still there, coiled and watchful, but something else. A knot of tension he'd been carrying since the moment he'd fled the Dursleys' house. Can you show me? He asked. The vault. The things they left for me. Griphook inclined his head. That is within my function. But first. He gestured to one of the guards, who produced a small leather pouch from its uniform. Your feet are bleeding. There is blood on the floor of the cart. It would be poor hospitality to let a client walk wounded through the deep vaults. Harry looked down at his feet. He'd almost forgotten about them, the cuts and scrapes from his barefoot run through London, the dried blood crusted between his toes. The pain was still there, muted but persistent, and now that he was paying attention, he realized he was exhausted. The kind of bone-deep tired that went beyond physical fatigue. The guard handed Griphook the pouch, and Griphook extracted a small vial of silvery liquid. Essence of Dittany, he explained. Expensive, but the Potter Vault can afford it. This will heal the cuts. I'm afraid we don't have shoes in your size. Harry took the vial and poured a drop of the liquid onto his palm. It was cool and smelled like crushed herbs. When he rubbed it on his feet, the cuts closed instantly, the skin knitting together without even a scar. Thank you, Harry said. Do not thank me yet. The sanctuary grants you 3 days of safety. What comes after is between you and whatever pursues you. Griphook gestured toward the cart. Come. The Potter Vault is in the deepest levels, near the dragon pens. It will be a long ride. The descent continued. The cart traveled deeper than Harry would have believed possible, through tunnels that grew stranger and older with every passing mile. The green torchlight gave way to bioluminescent fungi that grew in patches on the walls, casting a blue-white glow that made everything look underwater. The air grew warm and then hot and then warm again, carrying strange smells, sulfur and cinnamon in something that reminded Harry of thunderstorms. At one point, they passed a cavern where something enormous shifted in the darkness. Harry caught a glimpse of scales, a flash of reptilian eye, and then the cart was through and speeding down another tunnel. Dragon, Griphook said laconically. One of the old ones. It's been down here for 500 years. Gringotts has a pact with its kind. Harry filed that information away for later. He was beginning to understand that the magical world was far larger and stranger than anything he'd glimpsed on the surface. The custodians, the ancient pacts, the goblins and their deep places, it was all connected, all part of some vast tapestry he was only beginning to perceive. The cart slowed as they approached a massive door set into the stone. Unlike the other vault doors Harry had glimpsed, this one wasn't made of metal. It was made of something that looked like obsidian, its surface polished to a mirror shine, its edges inscribed with the Potter crest worked in silver filigree. Vault 713, Griphook said. The oldest of the Potter holdings. Opened only by blood. He gestured for Harry to approach the door. Place your hand on the crest. Harry did. The obsidian was cool beneath his palm, and the silver stag seemed to leap beneath his touch. There was a moment of resistance, a sensation of being weighed and measured, and then the door began to open, sliding into the stone with a sound like a knife being drawn across silk. The vault beyond was not what Harry expected. He'd imagined something like a bank vault from a movie, shelves of gold coins, treasure chests, artifacts stacked in dusty piles. But the Potter Vault was a room. A proper room, with walls of the same obsidian as the door, a floor of polished black stone, and a ceiling enchanted to show a starfield that moved slowly across an artificial sky. At the center of the room was a pedestal. On the pedestal were 3 objects. The first was a book, bound in leather that might have been dragon hide, its pages edged with gold. The second was a cloak, not the silver of invisibility cloaks Harry had glimpsed in the shop windows of Diagon Alley, but something older, its fabric shimmering with colors that existed somewhere between shadow and starlight. The third was a ring, a simple band of white gold set with a stone that seemed to contain captured firelight. And standing beside the pedestal, their forms translucent but more solid than they'd been in the park, were James and Lily Potter. You made it, James said. His voice echoed slightly, as if coming from a great distance. We weren't sure you would. Mum. Dad. Harry stepped toward them, then stopped. The memory of their earlier disappearance was still fresh, the way they'd flickered and faded as the silence closed in. Are you really here? Or is this another echo? We're more solid in the vault, Lily said. The protections on this place preserve us. But we're not alive, Harry. We can't be. We gave that up when we sealed the primacy. Harry felt the power surge in his chest, and for a moment, the lights in the vault flickered. You gave it up. You sealed something inside me without asking, and then you died, and you left me with the Dursleys. Do you have any idea what we know? James's voice was rough. We've been watching. Whenever the seal weakened enough for us to reach through, we watched. We saw what they did to you. And every time, we had to make the same choice, break the seal early to save you from them, or keep it intact to save you from the custodians. You chose the custodians. We chose the lesser evil. Lily stepped toward Harry, and this time, when she reached out to touch his face, her hand was almost solid. The Dursleys could hurt your body. The custodians would have destroyed your soul. And we knew, we hoped, that if you survived, if you held on long enough, the pain would make you something they couldn't predict. Make me what? Kind, Lily said simply. The primacy amplifies whatever heart wields it. A cruel heart becomes monstrous. A compassionate heart becomes transcendent. We couldn't guarantee you'd grow up kind, we could only give you the chance. The Dursleys' cruelty could have broken you. But it didn't. You chose mercy when you could have chosen annihilation. That's why you were able to stop the fire at all. Harry wanted to argue. Wanted to scream at them for their arrogance, their cruelty disguised as wisdom, their willingness to gamble with his suffering. But he remembered the moment in the hallway, the primacy roaring through him, demanding that he burn the Dursleys to ash. He remembered the choice he'd made, not because it was logical, not because it was deserved, but because he'd known, in some fundamental way, that becoming a monster to punish monsters was its own kind of defeat. I don't forgive you, he said quietly. I understand why you did it, but I don't forgive you. Not yet. James nodded, his expression pained but unsurprised. We're not asking for forgiveness. We're asking you to survive. Why are the custodians so afraid of me? Harry asked. What is the primacy, really? What makes it so dangerous that they'd hunt a child? The shades of his parents exchanged a look. Then Lily gestured toward the pedestal. The book first. It will explain what we can't, or at least, what we don't have time to explain. The custodians' forward scouts will be massing at the boundaries of Goblin territory. Cassiel will come personally. You have 3 days, and then the Real fight begins. Harry approached the pedestal and picked up the book. It was heavier than it looked, its dragonhide cover warm to the touch. When he opened it, the pages weren't paper, they were sheets of some material that felt like vellum but shimmered with an iridescent sheen. The text was handwritten in an elegant script that Harry recognized from the letter that had arrived at Privet Drive. The Chronicles of the Primacy, the first page read. Being a true accounting of the bloodline of the boundary, from its first manifestation to the present age. Compiled by Ignotus Peveril, with addendums by his descendants through the houses of Gaunt, Slytherin, and Potter. The boundary, Harry murmured. That was what the letter called it. The boundary before magic was tamed. The primacy is older than magic, James said. Older than wands, older than spells, older than any of the traditions the wizarding world understands. It's the power that existed in the instant before creation, the force that drew the line between what is and what isn't. When the universe was formless, the primacy gave it form. When the first living things emerged from the primordial chaos, the primacy was what allowed them to say, this is me, and that is not me. Boundary setting, Harry said. The concept felt right in his mouth, like a word he'd always known but never had cause to speak. Exactly. Lily's voice was eager now, the voice of a scholar discussing her favorite subject. The primacy isn't destruction, though it can destroy. It isn't creation, though it can create. It's definition. It's the power to say what something is, and what it is not. In its purest form, it can unmake reality and remake it according to the wielder's understanding. It can collapse the walls between realms, redefine the nature of magic itself, or erase entire civilizations from existence with a thought. Harry felt cold. The power inside him stirred restlessly, as if recognizing the description. And you sealed this inside me? We didn't have a choice. James's voice was harsh. The custodians found out about you before you were born. They discovered that the Potter bloodline carried the primacy. It's been dormant for generations, surfacing only rarely, but the potential was always there. They came to us when Lily was pregnant. They told us the prophecy. What prophecy? That the primacy's return would collapse the walls between realms, Lily said quietly. That the wielder would become either the greatest guardian the magical world had ever known or the greatest threat it had ever faced. That the choice between those two outcomes would be determined by the life the child lived before their 7th birthday. The number hit Harry like a physical blow. My 7th birthday. That's today. We know. James reached out as if to put a hand on Harry's shoulder, then seemed to remember he couldn't. The seal was always going to break on your 7th birthday. The custodians knew that as well as we did. They wanted us to kill you before then, to end the bloodline rather than risk the prophecy. When we refused, they gave us an alternative: let them seal you permanently, suppress the primacy so thoroughly that it could never awaken, render you essentially a squib for the rest of your life. But you didn't do that either. We couldn't. Lily's eyes were bright with tears that couldn't fall. A permanent seal would have destroyed your soul. It would have left you alive but empty, no magic, no personality, no self. The Dursleys' abuse was terrible, but at least it left you you. At least it left you the capacity to choose. So you fled, Harry said. You hid from the custodians. And then Voldemort found you instead. James nodded. The Dark Lord didn't know about the primacy. He was hunting us for other reasons, a different prophecy, one that spoke of a child who would have the power to defeat him. He thought killing you would secure his immortality. He didn't realize that by trying, he was playing directly into the custodian's hands. But the curse rebounded. The primacy protected me. It did more than protect you. Lily gestured toward the book in Harry's hands. The chronicles will explain in detail, but the short version is this: when Voldemort's killing curse struck you, it shattered against the seal we'd placed. But it didn't just rebound, it created a connection. A thread of soul magic linking you to him. That thread became a tracker, and the custodians were able to detect it. They've been monitoring you through that connection ever since, waiting for the seal to break so they could find you and finish what they started. Harry looked down at the book in his hands. At the cloak and the ring still waiting on the pedestal. These things you left me, the trunk, the artifacts, they're meant to help me fight them. The trunk contains our shades, bound to advise you as long as the enchantment holds. The cloak is a family heirloom, a true invisibility cloak that hides the wearer even from magical detection. And the ring? James hesitated. The ring is the most dangerous of the three. It contains a resonance stone, a fragment of the primacy's original manifestation, preserved from the time of Ignotus Peverell himself. Wearing it will amplify your control over the power, but it will also make you more visible to the custodians. It's a trade-off. Harry reached for the ring, then stopped. Why are you telling me all this now? If you've been able to watch me this whole time, why didn't you send me messages before? Why didn't you warn me about the custodians, or tell me about magic, or, the seal, Lily said, and her voice cracked. The seal that suppressed the primacy also suppressed our ability to reach you. We could only manifest when the seal weakened, and we could only send the trunk when you were old enough to understand. Your 7th birthday was the threshold. Before today, any direct contact would have shattered the seal prematurely, and if the seal had broken before you were ready, before you developed the compassion to counterbalance the power, I would have become what the custodians feared. Yes. Harry thought about the golden fire pouring out of him in the Dursleys' hallway. The seductive whisper of the primacy, urging him to burn Vernon and Petunia and Dudley to ash. The terrible, beautiful hunger of a power that wanted to unmake everything that had ever hurt him. He'd resisted. Barely. But he could feel how close he'd come to losing control, and the memory made him sick. 3 days, he said. 3 days to learn what's in this book, to master the cloak and the ring, to figure out how to control the primacy before the custodians come for me. 3 days is what the sanctuary gives you, Griphook interjected. He'd been standing so silently at the edge of the vault that Harry had almost forgotten he was there. But the custodians may not wait that long. Cassiel is unconventional. If he decides the ancient pacts are less important than containing you, even goblin territory may not be safe. Then we don't have 3 days. Harry picked up the cloak and the ring, tucking them into his clothes. The book he kept in his hands, its weight a reassurance. We have until Cassiel arrives. And I'm guessing that's going to be soon. The stone of the cavern trembled. It was a faint vibration, barely perceptible, but Harry felt it through his bare feet. Felt it through the primacy coiled in his chest. Something was happening on the surface. Something vast and patient and utterly inexorable was drawing closer. He's here, James said. His form was beginning to flicker again, the way it had in the park. Cassiel. I can feel him. Harry. Lily reached out, and this time her hand was almost solid against his cheek. Whatever happens, remember what we told you. The primacy is not your enemy. It's your birthright. And you are not alone. You have allies you haven't met yet, people who will stand with you because they believe in you, not because of what you are, but because of who you are. Mum, we love you. We have always loved you. And we are so proud of the person you're becoming. She pressed a kiss to his forehead. He felt it as a point of warmth, like sunlight focused through a magnifying glass, and then she and James were fading, their forms dissolving into motes of light that spiraled upward toward the starfield on the vault ceiling. Harry stood alone in the silence of the vault, the book clutched to his chest, the ring and cloak heavy in his pocket. Above him, the enchanted stars turned in their slow, indifferent dance. Griphook cleared his throat. We should return to the surface. If Cassiel is indeed here, the bank's defenses will need to be activated. And you. He hesitated, something that looked almost like respect crossing his angular features. You should read that book. Quickly. Harry nodded. The power inside him was stirring again, responding to the presence he could feel pressing down through miles of rock and stone. Cassiel. The leader of the custodians. The being who had hounded his parents to their deaths and hunted Harry across London. Somehow, impossibly, Harry wasn't afraid. Or rather, he was afraid, but the fear wasn't paralyzing. It was fuel. It was the same thing he'd felt in the cupboard when Vernon's fist was descending, the absolute certainty that if he survived this moment, he would survive the next one, and the one after that, until eventually there were no more moments to survive. He was a Potter. The Potters didn't give up. Let's go, he said, and followed Griphook back to the cart, the chronicles of the primacy open in his hands, the first words of the first chapter already burning themselves into his memory. In the beginning, before magic was tamed, before the realms were divided, before the veil was hung between the living and the dead, there was the boundary. And the boundary was neither light nor dark, neither good nor evil, neither creation nor destruction. It was simply the line between what was and what was not. And those who carried it in their blood were its keepers. The cart lurched into motion, and Harry read on as the deep places of the earth streamed past, carrying him toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of everything he'd ever known. Chapter 3, The custodians caged. The clock in Gringotts main hall had no hands. Instead, gears within its face rotated against each other in constant, slow realignment, and the numbers rearranged themselves according to some logic Harry couldn't fathom. He'd been staring at it for the past 20 minutes, the chronicles of the primacy open on his lap, while goblins rushed past in organized chaos that suggested the bank was preparing for war. 3 hours. That was how long it had been since he'd felt Cassiel's approach through the stone. 3 hours of reading by the green torchlight, absorbing information that felt less like learning and more like remembering. The Chronicles wasn't written in the way of ordinary books, its words seemed to bypass his eyes entirely, settling directly into his understanding with a familiarity that disturbed him. The primacy manifests in each generation according to the vessel's nature. In some, it sleeps until death. In others, it awakens slowly, a gradual unveiling of boundary sense. But in those for whom the blood runs truest, it breaks like a dam, and the vessel must learn to channel or be consumed. Harry had read that passage 4 times. Each time, the power in his chest pulsed in what felt like recognition. "There in the atrium," Griphook said, appearing at Harry's elbow with the suddenness of all goblins, who moved like shadows despite their heavy boots. The senior account manager had exchanged his formal robes for something that looked like armor, leather reinforced with metal plates, inscribed with the same ancient symbols that covered the Stone of Oaths. "Cassiel requests parley." "Requests?" That is the word he used. Griphook's thin lips pressed together. "He is being polite. It is not reassuring." Harry closed the book and stood. The cloak his parents had left him was draped over a nearby chair. He'd examined it earlier, marveling at the way it seemed to drink light, its fabric shimmering with colors that didn't quite exist. The ring was on his finger now, a band of white gold that had sized itself to fit his small hand perfectly. He could feel it working, the resonant stone within it humming at a frequency that matched the primacy in his blood. It was like having a second heartbeat, one that steadied the first. "What does the parley mean?" Harry asked. "It means Cassiel wants to talk before he acts. This is unusual. The custodians are not known for negotiation. Their mandate is to contain or eliminate threats to the boundary between realms. They do not typically ask permission." Harry thought about the silence that had pursued him through London. The patient, inexorable presence that had driven his parents to sacrifice themselves. What happens if I refuse to talk? Griphook's dark eyes were unreadable. Then the parley ends, and whatever Cassiel plans next begins. The sanctuary protects you for 3 days. Cassiel knows this. He cannot harm you while you remain on goblin soil. But he can make it impossible for you to leave. He can trap me here. Effectively. Harry looked around the main hall. The goblins had cleared the public areas, the wizards and witches who'd been conducting business had been ushered out through side passages, their transactions cut short. The counters were now manned by armored guards instead of clerks. Even the chandeliers had dimmed, their crystal facets angled to cast light in specific patterns that Griphook had explained were defensive wards made visible. "How many custodians are in the atrium?" Harry asked. "Cassiel alone stands at the threshold. But the streets of Diagon Alley have been emptied. The shops are closed. The residents have fled. Whatever force Cassiel commands, it has already secured the surrounding territory." Harry felt the primacy stir. For the past 3 hours, it had been quiescent, banked like coals, but now it was stretching, testing its boundaries the way Harry had once tested the limits of his cupboard when he thought the Dursleys were asleep. It wanted to act. It wanted to confront whatever threatened it. "Take me to him," Harry said. Griphook hesitated. "You are 7 years old." "I know how old I am." "You are 7 years old, and you have had access to your power for less than a day. Cassiel is older than the Ministry of Magic. Older than Gringotts. Older than most of the institutions the wizarding world considers eternal. He has faced primacy wielders before. He has won against them before. Then he's exactly the person I need to talk to." Griphook stared at him for a long moment. Then the goblin's thin lips curved in what might have been approval or might have been resignation, it was hard to tell with goblins. "You are very like your father. He also had the habit of walking toward danger instead of away from it." "My father died." "Yes. But he died protecting something he believed in. There are worse ends." Griphook turned and began walking toward the bronze doors at the front of the bank. "Come. Cassiel waits. And whatever else the custodians are, they are not liars. If he says parley, he means parley. The bronze doors were closed. Harry could feel what waited beyond them, not through the primacy, or at least not only through it. Even without his power, he thought he would have sensed the presence on the other side of those doors. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing, without looking, that the drop was waiting. "Open them," Harry said. The goblin guards flanking the doors pulled them open, and Harry stepped through into the atrium of Gringotts. The marble space was empty. Not just of people, the benches had been removed, the informational plaques, even the decorative urns that usually flanked the entrance. All that remained was a single figure standing in the precise center of the floor, silhouetted against the light streaming through the building's glass ceiling. Cassiel. The leader of the custodians was not what Harry had expected. In his imagination, fueled by the fragments of information he'd gleaned from the chronicles and his parents' warnings, he'd pictured something like Voldemort, a monster wearing human skin, radiating malice and hunger. Someone who looked the way the primacy felt when it was urging him toward destruction. Cassiel looked like a man who had been carved from driftwood. Tall and weathered, with skin the color of old parchment and features that seemed to have been shaped by wind and time rather than any human heritage. His hair was white, not the white of age, but the white of bone left too long in the sun. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and when he moved, it was with the peculiar stillness of someone who had long ago stopped making unnecessary gestures. He wore no armor. Carried no visible weapon. His robes were simple and gray, the fabric so old that the edges had begun to fray. There was nothing threatening about him at all, and that was what made him terrifying. "Harry Potter," Cassiel said. His voice was quiet, carrying easily across the marble floor despite its softness. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. You didn't give me much choice." Harry stopped 10 feet from the custodian leader, close enough to see the fine lines around those pale eyes but far enough that he could react if Cassiel moved. "You've trapped me here. I've secured the area. There is a difference." Cassiel studied him with an expression that wasn't hostile, wasn't anything, really. It was the look of someone examining a puzzle they'd been working on for a very long time. "May I see it?" "The primacy. I've felt its awakening, everyone sensitive to the boundary has felt it, but I haven't seen it manifest in this age." Harry didn't move. "Why would I show you anything?" "Because you're curious. Because I'm offering to answer your questions, and answers require a certain amount of reciprocity." Cassiel tipped his head slightly. "I know what your parents told you. I know what the Chronicles says. But I suspect you've already realized there are gaps in their accounting. Things they didn't have time to explain. Things they may not have fully understood themselves." The power in Harry's chest surged, and he let it. Just enough to make his eyes glow, the golden light that had poured out of him in the Dursleys' hallway, now contained and focused. "You hunted them. You hunted me. You used the piece of Voldemort's soul in my scar to track me for 7 years. Why should I believe anything you say?" Cassiel looked at the glow in Harry's eyes with an expression that was almost reverent. "There it is," he murmured. "The boundary itself, wearing a child's face. I haven't seen that light in a very long time." He straightened, and his expression became businesslike. "I hunted your parents because they made a choice that endangered billions. I tracked you because I needed to know if you would make the same choice. And I'm here now because I want to offer you an alternative." "To what?" "To becoming what the primacy wants you to become." Cassiel gestured, and the marble floor between them shimmered, resolving into a three-dimensional image, a map of London, rendered in miniature. Harry could see the River Thames winding through it, the familiar landmarks rendered in perfect detail. "Tell me what you know about the custodians." Harry thought about the fragments from the Chronicles, the warnings from his parents. "You're an order of magical beings. Wizards, werewolves, Vila, others. You believe the primacy is a threat to the walls between realms. You think if it manifests fully, it will collapse the boundaries. End the world as we know it. That's the simplified version. Cassiel nodded at the map. Do you know how many times the primacy has manifested in recorded history? The Chronicles said, the Chronicles were written by primacy wielders. Of course they'd paint themselves in the best possible light. Cassiel's voice remained soft, almost gentle, but there was an edge beneath it. The truth is that the primacy has manifested 7 times in the past 10,000 years. Each time, it was carried by someone who believed they could control it. Someone who was certain they would be the exception. And each time, within a decade of awakening, that person became a catastrophe. The map of London flickered and changed. Harry saw a city he didn't recognize, spires of crystal and streets paved with something that glowed, and then the city was burning. Figures fled through the streets while a single figure stood at the center of the destruction, wreathed in golden light identical to the glow in Harry's eyes. Atlantis, Cassiel said. 4th manifestation. The wielder was a woman named Selene. She was a healer before her awakening. Dedicated her life to curing the sick, protecting the vulnerable, serving her community. When the primacy awoke, she used it to eliminate disease from her city. Then to eliminate what she considered the causes of disease, poverty, inequality, the systems that allowed suffering to exist. Within 7 years, she had declared herself the arbiter of all human failing. Anyone she judged corrupt or cruel or simply insufficient, she unmade. When the custodians finally stopped her, Atlantis was a graveyard. The image shifted again. A different city, a different wielder. Then another. Then another. Each one beginning with golden light and ending with ashes. The primacy isn't evil, Cassiel continued. I've never believed that, and I've argued against those in the custodians who do. It's a force of definition, of boundary setting, and in its pure form, it's as natural as gravity. But it's also profoundly, catastrophically incompatible with mortal minds. The power to define what is and what is not, imagine carrying that inside you. Imagine every grievance, every injustice you witness, every moment of suffering you encounter, and the power whispering to you that you could fix it. You could eliminate it. You could make the world right, if only you were willing to act. Harry thought about the Dursleys. The golden fire coursing through him, showing him every cruelty they'd ever inflicted, and the seductive certainty that he could end it. End them. He'd resisted, but he remembered how close he'd come. I stopped, he said. I could have burned them. I didn't. For now. Cassiel's pale eyes were not unkind. You've had the power for less than a day. Most of the previous wielders held out for years before they fell. Selene lasted 6. The shortest was almost 2. You're not the first to resist the primacy's whispers, Harry. You're just the first to face them at 7 years old, with no training, no support, and the belief that you're somehow uniquely equipped to master a power that has broken every vessel it's ever inhabited. What happened to the others? Harry asked. The ones who fell. What happened to them? Cassiel was silent for a moment. The custodians killed them. Every time. We've never found another way. The words hung in the air between them. Harry felt the primacy respond to the threat. It understood what Cassiel was saying, even if Harry didn't want to. The power in his chest was coiling, readying itself, preparing to defend against an enemy that had killed its previous vessels across thousands of years. But you said you wanted to offer me an alternative. I did. Cassiel waved a hand, and the map of London dissolved. What do you know about how your parents sealed the primacy? Not much. They said they used a ritual. That it suppressed my power until my 7th birthday. That a permanent seal would have destroyed my soul. Your parents were brilliant. Lily especially, her understanding of blood magic was decades ahead of anyone else in her generation. But they were also desperate and working with incomplete information. Cassiel reached into his robes and withdrew a scroll, its surface covered in writing so small it looked like black lace. The seal they placed on you was never meant to be temporary. It was a variant of the custodian's containment protocols that have successfully bound primacy wielders in the past without destroying their souls. The reason your parents' seal broke is because they modified it. They tried to make it kinder, gentler, less absolute. In doing so, they made it fragile. If you're offering to seal me again, I'm offering to fix what they did. Cassiel held up the scroll. This is the original containment protocol. It's been refined over 7,000 years, tested on 3 separate primacy wielders. It doesn't destroy the soul, it harmonizes it. Integrates the primacy into the vessel's magical core in a way that prevents it from overwhelming the conscious mind. You would still have access to your power, but it would be moderated. Filtered. You would never face the choice your predecessors faced because the choice would be removed. Harry stared at the scroll. The primacy in his chest was screaming, not in words, but in a sensation of absolute, primal rejection. Whatever that containment protocol was, the power wanted nothing to do with it. And if I refuse? Then we wait. Cassiel rolled the scroll and returned it to his robes. The sanctuary protects you for 3 days. After that, you must leave Goblin territory, and when you do, the custodians will be waiting. We've assembled a strike force larger than any we've deployed in the past 1,000 years. Wizards, Vila, werewolves, other beings whose nature I won't disclose. All of them prepared to do whatever is necessary to prevent another Atlantis. You'll kill me. I'll try not to. Cassiel's pale eyes met Harry's. Despite what you may believe, I don't want you dead. You're an innocent child who was born carrying a burden no one should have to bear. But I've seen what the primacy does to innocence. I've watched good people become monsters while genuinely believing they were becoming saviors. If the choice is between your life and the lives of billions, I will choose the billions. I've done it before. I'll do it again. The atrium was very quiet. Harry could hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady, and beneath it, the counterpoint rhythm of the primacy. The power was angry now, not at Cassiel, or not only at Cassiel. It was angry at the containment protocol. Angry at the threat of being suppressed again, locked away, bound into something smaller than it was. But it wasn't just anger. Harry realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that the primacy was also afraid. Not the human fear he'd felt in the cupboard when Vernon's fist was descending. Something older and stranger. The fear of a force that had been hunted for millennia, that had watched vessel after vessel be destroyed by people who couldn't understand what it was or what it wanted. What would happen if I could prove you wrong? Harry asked. Cassiel blinked. The gesture was so human, so unexpected from that weathered face, that Harry almost smiled. Prove me wrong about what? About the primacy. About the inevitability of corruption. You said every previous wielder fell. But you also said my mother's understanding of blood magic was decades ahead of anyone else's. And you admitted that the containment protocols destroy souls, you just think the ones you plan to use don't. But you've only tested them on 3 wielders out of 7. You don't actually know what you're doing any more than my parents did. You're very articulate for a 7-year-old. I've had a lot of time to think. The cupboard was good for that. Cassiel's expression flickered. It was the first sign of emotion Harry had seen from him, something that might have been discomfort or recognition. The cupboard. The Dursleys kept me under the stairs. For 7 years. My parents knew about it, and they let it happen because they thought cruelty would teach me compassion. You knew about it too, didn't you? Through the tracker in my scar. You've been watching me since I was a baby, and you never intervened. You left me there, with people who starved me and beat me and told me I was worthless, because you were waiting to see what I'd become. The silence that followed was different from the silences before. It was heavier. Weighted with something Harry couldn't quite identify. Yes, Cassiel said finally. I knew. And I did nothing. You're right to be angry about that. I'm not angry. Harry was surprised to realize it was true. I was, when I first found out. But now I'm just, tired. Everyone who was supposed to protect me, my parents, the custodians, the magical world that knew my name, all of you decided my suffering was acceptable. All of you had reasons. Good reasons, probably. But none of you actually asked me what I wanted. And what do you want? Harry thought about it. He thought about the Dursleys trapped in their visions. The power roaring through him, demanding that he burn them to ash, and the choice he'd made to let them live. He thought about his parents' shades, their faces full of grief and guilt, telling him that his suffering had been a calculated risk. He thought about the chronicles of the primacy and its record of wielders who had started with good intentions and ended as tyrants. I want to not become a monster, he said. That's what this is all about, isn't it? You're afraid I'll lose control. My parents were afraid I'd lose control. Even the primacy is afraid I'll lose control, because every time one of its vessels has fallen, it's ended in death. Everyone is afraid of the same thing. And you think you can defy that fear? I think I have to try. Harry met Cassiel's pale eyes. You said the seal was going to break on my 7th birthday no matter what. You said the previous wielders held out for years before they fell. So I have time. If you really don't want to kill me, if you really want to give me a chance, then give me time. Train me. Watch me. And if you're right, if the primacy starts corrupting me, then you can use your containment protocol. You'll have lost nothing. And if I'm wrong, then you'll have gained something none of the previous custodians ever had. Harry stepped forward, closing the distance between them. An ally. Someone who can actually control the primacy, who can use it for what it's supposed to be used for. You said it's a force of boundary setting, of definition. That doesn't have to mean destruction. It could mean protection. It could mean fixing the boundaries between realms instead of collapsing them. Cassiel studied him for a long moment. The weathered face betrayed no emotion, but something was happening behind those pale eyes, some rapid recalculation that Harry couldn't follow. You're not what I expected, Cassiel said. When I felt the seal break, I prepared myself to face a creature of rage and terror. A child broken by cruelty, awakened to godlike power, already half consumed by the desire for vengeance. The tracker showed me what the Dursleys did to you. I assumed. You assumed I'd be exactly what the primacy wanted me to be. Someone who'd been hurt so badly that the power to never be hurt again would be irresistible. Something like that. Harry felt the primacy pulse in his chest. It was still angry, still afraid, but it was also listening. Paying attention to this conversation in a way it hadn't paid attention to anything since awakening. The primacy didn't make me let the Dursleys live. That was me. The part of me that's still me, not the part that's ancient power. If I can make that choice once, I can make it again. Perhaps. Cassiel's voice was thoughtful now, the edge of certainty fading. But you should know that I'm not the only voice in the custodians. There are those who believe you should be killed immediately, sanctuary or no sanctuary. There are those who would break the ancient pacts themselves if it meant eliminating the threat you represent. I've held them back so far, but if you refuse the containment protocol, they will demand action. What will you tell them? Cassiel was silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It was a thin expression, worn and reluctant, but it was genuine. I'll tell them that I've been doing this for a very long time. That I've faced 7 primacy wielders and killed every one of them. And that I've been wrong before, not often, but often enough to know that certainty is the enemy of wisdom. He paused. I'll tell them that I want to try something different. Something different? You said you want to be trained. To be watched. To prove that the primacy can be controlled. Cassiel extended his hand. I'm willing to offer you that chance. Not the containment protocol, not yet. But a binding. Something temporary, something that will limit the primacy's influence without suppressing it entirely. It will give you time to learn control while giving us time to observe. If you succeed, the binding comes off. If you start to fall, we have the containment protocol as a failsafe. The primacy reacted violently to the word binding. Harry felt it surge against his ribs, felt the golden light trying to push through his skin. It didn't want to be bound. It didn't want to be limited. It was a force of definition, and limitations were antithetical to everything it was. But Harry thought about what his mother had said. The primacy amplifies whatever heart wields it. If his heart was filled with fear and rage and the desperate need for control, the primacy would become a weapon of fear and rage and control. But if his heart could hold something else, trust, maybe, or hope, or the fragile possibility of cooperation, then maybe the primacy could become something else too. What kind of binding? He asked. A ripple passed through the air behind Cassiel. For a moment, Harry thought it was the primacy acting without his direction, but then the air itself seemed to split, and figures began stepping through the rift. Custodians. They emerged in a formation that spoke of long practice, wizards and witches in grey robes similar to Cassiel's, their wands held at the ready. Behind them came creatures Harry didn't recognize, a woman whose hair moved like flames in a wind that didn't exist, her features too perfect to be human, a man who moved with a wolf's liquid grace, his eyes yellow and watchful, beings of shadow and light and something in between, all of them armed, all of them watching Harry with expressions ranging from fear to hatred to studied neutrality. The strike force Cassiel had mentioned. And at its head, a witch who looked young, barely older than some of the teenagers Harry had glimpsed in Diagon Alley, but whose eyes were ancient. Her dark hair was cropped short, her robes practical and unadorned except for a silver pin that marked her as a senior custodian. Cassiel, she said, and her voice was sharp. We felt the parley end. What's happening? Patience, Selwyn. Cassiel didn't look at her, his eyes were still on Harry. The parley isn't over. We're negotiating terms. Terms? Another custodian stepped forward, the werewolf, Harry recognized, from the way his muscles bunched beneath his skin. The boy refused containment. The terms are simple. We wait 3 days, then we take him. The boy has a name, Harry said. And he's standing right here. The werewolf's yellow eyes fixed on him. Harry felt the weight of that gaze, it was the look of a predator assessing prey, but he didn't flinch. He'd spent 7 years being looked at like he was less than human. A werewolf's contempt was nothing new. The boy speaks, the werewolf said. Does it think its opinion matters? Theron. Cassiel's voice was quiet, but it cut through the atrium like a blade. You'll be respectful or you'll be silent. That's not a request. Theron's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak again. The young-looking witch, Selwyn, moved to stand beside Cassiel, her gaze flicking between him and Harry with an expression that was more calculating than hostile. What terms? She asked. Harry has proposed an alternative to immediate containment. A temporary binding, something that limits the primacy's influence without suppressing the power itself. He wants time to prove he can control it. The reaction was immediate. Several of the custodians started speaking at once, their voices overlapping in a surge of protest. Harry caught fragments, dangerous precedent, we've never, the risk is, but Cassiel raised a hand, and the protests cut off as cleanly as if a door had slammed. I'm aware of your objections, he said. I've considered them. I've also considered the fact that every primacy wielder we've faced has been an adult already set in their patterns of thought and behavior. Harry is 7 years old. His patterns aren't set. His heart, as his mother would say, is still being written. You're suggesting we gamble on a child's moral development, Selwyn said. Her tone wasn't hostile, exactly, but it was skeptical. You've never been one for gambles, Cassiel. I've never had reason to be. Cassiel turned back to Harry. The binding I'm proposing is called a soul latch. Temporary. Reversible. It creates a connection between you and a custodian of your choice, a thread that will alert that custodian if the primacy begins to overwhelm your conscious control. As long as you remain in balance, the binding is dormant. If you start to lose yourself, the custodian will know immediately, and we can intervene before the corruption takes hold. Harry understood immediately. You want to put a leash on me. I want to give you what you asked for, time to prove yourself, while giving my people the assurance they need that you won't become another Atlantis while we wait. Cassiel's pale eyes held his. I'm trying to find middle ground, Harry. This is what middle ground looks like. The primacy howled. Harry could feel it fighting against the very concept of the soul latch, against the idea of being monitored, constrained, limited to someone else's definition of balance. Every instinct the power gave him screamed to refuse, to fight, to tear through the custodians and flee into the unknown. But Harry's instincts had been shaped by the cupboard. By years of learning to be small, to be quiet, to accept constraints that seemed unbearable because the alternative was worse. The primacy wanted freedom. Harry wanted survival. If I agree to this, he said slowly, who would I be bound to? Cassiel considered. The choice is yours, within reason. The custodian must be willing, I won't compel anyone to carry the latch, and must be someone I trust to act appropriately if the binding triggers. What about you? The atrium went very still again. Cassiel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his pale eyes, surprise, or perhaps wariness. You would choose me as your anchor. You're the leader. You're the one who's faced primacy wielders before. You're the one who said you don't want me dead. Harry paused. You're also the one who admitted you were wrong about me. If I'm going to be bound to someone, I want it to be someone who can change their mind. Selwyn made a small sound that might have been disbelief. Theron actually growled, a low rumble in his chest. But Cassiel held Harry's gaze for a long moment, and then the thin smile returned. You are very like your mother, he said. Lily had the same talent for finding the weakest point in an argument and pressing on it until something cracked. He extended his hand again. Very well. I'll agree to be your anchor. But know this, if the binding triggers, if the primacy starts to overwhelm you, I will act. Not with the containment protocol, not at first. But I will stop you, by whatever means necessary. Do you understand? Harry understood. Cassiel was offering him a chance, but it was a chance with a built-in consequence. If Harry failed, Cassiel would do exactly what the custodians had always done, kill the vessel to prevent the catastrophe. The only difference was that this time, Harry would have a warning before it happened. He took Cassiel's hand. The soul latch was not what Harry expected. He had braced himself for pain, for violation, for some terrible intrusion into his mind and soul. What happened instead was almost gentle. A thread of cool energy wound around the primacy in his chest, not suppressing it, not caging it, but simply, touching it. Establishing a connection. It was like having someone place a hand on his shoulder and promise not to push. Harry felt the primacy's reaction more strongly than he felt the latch itself. The power writhed and struggled, trying to throw off the connection. But Cassiel's presence was steady, unyielding, and after a moment, the primacy subsided. It wasn't defeated, Harry could still feel its resentment, its fear, its desperate need for freedom, but it was contained. For now. It's done, Cassiel said, releasing Harry's hand. The latch will remain as long as we both consent to it. If either of us withdraws consent, the binding breaks. That's the safeguard, no one can be trapped in a soul latch against their will. Convenient, Harry said. For you. For both of us. Cassiel turned to his assembled custodians. The threat has been contained for now. Maintain the perimeter, but stand down from active engagement. No one, and I mean no one, is to attempt to harm Harry Potter while he remains under my protection. Is that understood? A murmur of acknowledgement ran through the strike force. Theron looked mutinous, but even he inclined his head after a moment of silent struggle. Selwyn simply watched, her ancient eyes unreadable, before turning and gesturing for the others to withdraw. The custodians melted back through the rift, disappearing as silently as they'd arrived. Within moments, only Cassiel remained in the atrium, along with Harry and the goblin guards who had been watching the entire exchange with expressions of barely concealed fascination. "There's one more thing," Cassiel said, his voice dropping so that only Harry could hear. "The soul latch will alert me if the primacy begins to overwhelm you. But it won't help you learn control. For that, you'll need training, actual training, not just the fragments of knowledge your parents left in that book. If you're serious about proving the custodians wrong, you'll need a teacher. I thought that was you. I'm the custodian leader, not a tutor. I can monitor the latch, but I can't teach you what you need to know." Cassiel glanced toward the bronze doors of Gringotts. "Besides, there's someone in Diagon Alley who's been waiting for you since the seal broke. Someone who knew your parents, who understands the primacy better than almost anyone alive, and who has a rather personal stake in making sure you don't become a monster." "Who?" Cassiel's thin smile returned. "Her name is Mina Ollivander. She's a wandmaker's apprentice, though apprentice is perhaps too formal a word for what she actually is. Garrick Ollivander's granddaughter, the old wandmaker took her in after her parents died in the last war. She's been experimenting with boundary magic for years, trying to understand the edges where wandlore meets the older powers. When the seal broke, she felt it. And she refused to evacuate with the other shopkeepers. She's still in Diagon Alley. She's in her grandfather's shop, arguing with the custodian I assigned to escort her out. I suspect she's winning." Cassiel began walking toward the bronze doors. "Shall we?" Harry followed him, acutely aware of the primacy settling in his chest. The power was still angry, still afraid, but the soul latch had changed something. It had given the primacy a reference point, a boundary, ironically enough, against which it could measure itself. The connection to Cassiel was like a handrail on a staircase. It didn't stop Harry from falling, but it reminded him which direction was up. The streets of Diagon Alley were unrecognizable from the bustling marketplace Harry had seen earlier. The shops were closed, their windows dark. The cobblestones were empty except for occasional custodian patrols, figures in grey robes who watched Harry pass with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Overhead, the sky had taken on a strange, bruised quality, as if the presence of so many magical beings in one place was straining something fundamental. Cassiel walked in silence, his long strides eating up the distance. Harry had to half-jog to keep up, but he didn't complain. He was too busy thinking about what he'd just agreed to. The soul latch. The training. The custodian's promise to stand down. It felt like victory. It also felt like a trap. "Can I ask you something?" Harry said as they passed the shuttered front of Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. "You can. The vision you showed me. Of Atlantis. Of the other primacy wielders who fell. Was that real? Or was it a manipulation? Something designed to scare me into accepting the binding?" Cassiel didn't answer immediately. They walked another half-block before he spoke, and when he did, his voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like grief. "It was real. Every image, every city, every death. I was there for most of them. I've been the custodian leader for a very long time, Harry. Long enough to bury friends who were better people than I'll ever be. Long enough to make choices that still haunt me centuries after the fact. Then you really do believe I'll fall? You're just waiting for it to happen. I believe the pattern is what it is. I also believe that patterns can be broken, rarely, unpredictably, and usually by people too stubborn to accept the way things are." Cassiel glanced down at him. "Your parents were like that. James and Lily. They refused to accept that the only options were death or permanent suppression. They believed the primacy could be something other than a curse. That belief got them killed, but it also preserved you. And now here you are, proposing to break the pattern again. Does that make me brave or stupid? It makes you a potter. Cassiel stopped in front of a narrow, ancient-looking shop with a sign that read Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. The windows were dark, but Harry could see light flickering inside, candlelight, warm and golden, so unlike the cold blue of the custodian's wards. Your parents' gamble was that suffering would teach you compassion. It seems they were right. The question now is whether that compassion can survive the primacy's influence. Only one way to find out. Indeed. Cassiel pushed open the shop door, setting off a small bell that chimed somewhere in the dusty depths. Mina. I've brought someone to see you. The interior of Ollivanders was a labyrinth of narrow boxes stacked floor to ceiling, each one containing a wand that had been waiting, in some cases for centuries, for the right witch or wizard to claim it. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and something else, something that reminded Harry of the moments before a thunderstorm. Magic, he realized. So much magic concentrated in one place that it had become a physical presence. A figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the shop. She was older than Harry had expected, not a child, not even a teenager, but a young woman in her early 20s. Her hair was a tangle of dark curls pinned back from her face with what looked like a wand that had been snapped in half. Her eyes were very dark, very bright, and fixed on Harry with an intensity that made him want to take a step back. "So you're the one," she said. Her voice was low, almost musical, with an accent Harry couldn't place. "The primacy's new vessel. I felt you awaken. Felt it all the way across London, like someone had set off a bomb made of pure boundary magic." "You're Mina," Harry said. "Cassiel says you knew my parents." "I knew your mother. Lily. She came to me a few months before you were born." Mina moved closer, and Harry saw that her hands were covered in fine silver scars, the kind of marks left by magical backlash. She was looking for answers about the primacy. About how to protect you from it without destroying what she called your essential self. I was still an apprentice then, barely older than you are now, but Lily had heard about my research. She thought I might be able to help. Did you? Mina's dark eyes flickered. Not enough. I gave her what I could, theories about boundary harmonization, techniques for stabilizing volatile magical cores. But I didn't have the pieces she really needed. No one did. And then she died, and I spent 7 years wondering if I could have done more. That's why you're still here, Harry said. That's why you didn't evacuate. I've been waiting for you, Harry Potter. Ever since your mother walked into this shop with her belly full of impossible power and asked me to help her save her son. Mina reached out and took his hand, her scarred fingers surprisingly gentle. I've been waiting to finish what she started. Cassiel made a sound that might have been approval or resignation. Mina Ollivander is perhaps the only person alive who understands the primacy from a theoretical standpoint as well as a practical one. She's been studying boundary magic since she was old enough to hold a wand, and she has access to the Ollivander family archives, records of wand lore going back to the time when magic wasn't channeled through wood and core but through the wielder's own blood. You want me to train with her, Harry said. I want you to learn from her. What you do with that learning is your choice. Cassiel moved toward the door. I'll leave you two to get acquainted. I need to brief the custodians on our new arrangement, and then I need to contact the Ministry of Magic before they do something rash. The British magical government isn't known for its subtlety, and they're going to have questions about why Diagon Alley has been occupied by an extranational paramilitary order. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. 3 days, Harry. The sanctuary lasts 3 days. After that, you're free to leave Goblin territory, and when you do, both the custodians and the ministry will be watching. Use the time well. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft chime. Harry stood in the dusty shop, surrounded by thousands of wands that had waited centuries for their owners, holding the hand of a woman who had been waiting 7 years for him. The primacy pulsed in his chest, still angry, still afraid, but also, curious. Whatever Mina was, whatever she knew, the power was interested. Right, Mina said, releasing his hand and clapping her scarred fingers together. Let's start with the basics. What do you know about the primacy so far? Not what the chronicles told you, what you actually understand. What you felt since the seal broke. It's... Harry hesitated, searching for words. It's like a fire. Or maybe more like a river. Something that wants to flow. When I let it flow, things happen. I can feel people's emotions, their memories, their sins, I guess. And I can decide what to do about them. Punish them. Destroy them. Change them. And when you don't let it flow, then it builds up. Pressure. Like holding your breath. Eventually you have to let it out, and when you do, it's harder to control. Mina nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd long suspected. That matches the theoretical models. The primacy is fundamentally a force of expression. It wants to define things, to draw lines, to set boundaries, to say what something is and what it is not. The more you suppress it, the more violently it expresses when it finally breaks free. But expressing it without control is what leads to. She gestured vaguely. Atlantis. Sodom. 3 separate dark ages in magical history that the ministries of the world have worked very hard to cover up. So I'm doomed either way. You're doomed if you try to control the primacy through suppression. That's what your parents' seal was, suppression, and you saw how well that worked. Mina began pacing, her hands moving as she talked, sketching shapes in the air that Harry couldn't quite see. But there's another approach. Instead of trying to hold the river back, you learn to direct it. To channel it. To give it boundaries of your own making, so that when it expresses itself, it does so in ways that don't destroy everything around you. Boundaries. Harry thought about the word. The primacy stirred at it, recognizing something familiar. Cassiel said the primacy is a force of boundary setting. Exactly. And the key to controlling it is to use boundary setting on the primacy itself. Not suppression, delineation. You define what the power is allowed to do, and more importantly, what it's not allowed to do. You create rules. Limits. A framework within which the primacy can express itself freely without becoming destructive. Harry felt the primacy's reaction to this idea, a complex mixture of resistance and intrigue. The power didn't like limits, but it also didn't like the alternative. Being suppressed, being bound, being leashed like a wild animal. If the choice was between external controls and internal ones, the primacy vastly preferred internal ones. How do I do that? He asked. Mina smiled. It was a fierce expression, full of teeth and determination. That's what we're going to figure out. You, me, and every scrap of boundary magic research I've compiled over the past 7 years. We have 3 days before the sanctuary ends. Let's make them count. She led him deeper into the shop, past the towering shelves of wand boxes, through a door hidden behind a tapestry, and down a flight of stairs that seemed to go much further than the building's dimensions should have allowed. The basement of Ollivander's was nothing like the dusty shop above. It was a laboratory, tables covered in parchment and instruments, walls lined with books that pulsed with their own internal light, and at the center of it all, a circular space cleared of furniture, its stone floor inscribed with a complex mandala of lines and symbols. My grandfather lets me use this space for my research, Mina said, seeing Harry's expression. Wand lore is boundary magic in its most refined form. Every wand is a boundary between the wizard's power and the world's response. Most wand makers don't think about it in those terms, but Garrick does. He's the one who encouraged me to study the primacy in the first place. Where is he now? Evacuated with the others. I told him I'd stay behind to protect the shop. He pretended to believe me. Mina gestured toward the mandala on the floor. Stand in the center. This is a resonance array. It will help me map the primacy's current state of integration with your magical core. Think of it like a diagnostic spell, but for powers that predate spells entirely. Harry stepped into the mandala. The moment his bare feet touched the inscribed lines, he felt something shift, a current of energy that ran through the stone and up into his body, gentle but insistent. The primacy responded immediately, and Harry saw the mandala lines begin to glow with golden light. "Interesting," Mina murmured, circling him with a notebook in hand. "The integration is much deeper than I expected. If I didn't know better, I'd say the primacy has been part of your magical core since birth, not just dormant, but actively integrated. That shouldn't be possible with a sealed power. Your parents' ritual must have been more sophisticated than the custodians realized. Cassiel said my mother's understanding of blood magic was decades ahead of anyone else." "Decades. Ha." Mina made a note. "Lily Potter was centuries ahead of the custodians. The whole order is ossified, they've been doing the same things the same ways for so long they've forgotten why they started. Cassiel is better than most, but even he's trapped in patterns he doesn't fully examine." She paused. "Don't tell him I said that. I actually respect him. Mostly." The mandala flared brighter, and Harry felt the primacy pulse in response. For a moment, he was somewhere else entirely, not Ollivanders, not London, but a place of pure boundary, a line of light stretching across infinite darkness. He could see the edges of worlds, the membranes between realities, the delicate architecture of what was and what was not. It was beautiful and terrifying and utterly beyond his comprehension. Then the vision faded, and he was back in the basement, gasping. "What was that?" Mina demanded, her notebook forgotten. "What did you just see?" "I don't know. Everything. Nothing. Harry struggled for words. "The boundary. The real one. The line between what is and what isn't. I saw it. Just for a second." Mina stared at him. Then she crossed to one of the bookshelves and began pulling down volumes with frantic energy. "You shouldn't have been able to do that. The resonance array is a diagnostic tool, it shouldn't provide direct perception of the boundary itself. Unless what? Unless the primacy isn't just integrated into your magical core. Unless it's so deeply embedded that it's actually rewriting how you perceive reality." She turned back to him, her dark eyes blazing with excitement and something that might have been fear. "Harry, when your parents sealed you, they didn't just suppress the primacy. They bound it to your fundamental sense of self. It's not a separate entity riding along inside you, it's you. It's been woven into your identity so thoroughly that you can't separate them. Is that bad? It's unprecedented. Every previous primacy wielder experienced the power as something external, a force they could negotiate with, struggle against, eventually be overwhelmed by. But if the primacy is integrated into your core self, then those same dynamics don't apply. You're not fighting an external force. You're fighting yourself." Harry thought about the golden fire in the Dursleys' hallway. The seductive whisper that had urged him toward destruction. It hadn't felt like an external voice, it had felt like his own thoughts, his own desires, amplified and intensified until they were almost impossible to resist. "That explains why I was able to stop," he said slowly. "When I chose not to burn them. It wasn't me versus the primacy. It was me versus a part of me. The part that wanted revenge. And that part lost." Mina's voice was very quiet. A 7-year-old boy, raised in an abusive household, given godlike power for the first time in his life, and he chose mercy over vengeance. Do you understand how significant that is? Every other primacy wielder fell because they couldn't resist the power's seduction. But you already have. The first test, the moment that determines everything, and you passed. I almost didn't. But you did. That's what matters. Mina crossed the room and knelt in front of him, putting her scarred hands on his shoulders. "Harry, I've been studying the primacy for 7 years. I've read every account of every wielder who ever lived. And I've never seen anything like what you just described. The integration, the self-control, the capacity for mercy, it's not supposed to be possible. But it is possible. You're proof. So what do we do now? Now. Mina smiled her fierce smile. Now we start training for real. We have 3 days to teach you how to set boundaries on the primacy, how to channel it without being consumed by it, and how to use it for something other than destruction. By the time the sanctuary ends, I want you to be able to walk out of Gringotts and face the custodians not as a threat they need to contain, but as what? As the thing your parents believed you could be. The reason they sacrificed everything. Mina stood and began gathering books and instruments from her tables. The custodians think the primacy is inherently corrupting. Your parents believed it amplifies whatever heart wields it. If they were right, and everything I've seen tonight suggests they were, then the only question is what kind of heart you're going to have. Harry looked down at his hands. They were still small, still scarred, still the hands of the boy who'd slept in a cupboard and learned to be invisible. But they were also the hands that had stopped the fire. The hands that had chosen mercy when destruction would have been easier. I don't know what kind of heart I have, he admitted. I don't know if I can be what they wanted me to be. That's the thing about hearts, Mina said, turning back to him with an armful of glowing books. They're not fixed. They grow. They change. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they become exactly what they need to be. She set the books on the floor around the mandala and gestured for him to sit. Now. Let's begin with the first principle of boundary setting. Close your eyes and imagine a line between what you are and what you're not. Harry closed his eyes, and the training began. Chapter 4, The Memory of Ruin. The resonance array blazed to life around Harry's feet, its inscribed lines burning with golden light that matched the fire coiled in his chest. He'd been sitting cross-legged on the cold stone floor for what felt like hours, his eyes closed, his breathing slow, while Mina circled him like a hawk examining prey. The training had begun with simple exercises, imagining boundaries, visualizing lines between what he was and what he wasn't, but the primacy had responded to those exercises in ways neither of them had anticipated. Again, Mina said, her voice coming from somewhere to his left. Define the boundary between your will and the primacy's impulse. Don't suppress it, delineate it. Harry tried. The power surged, and he felt the now familiar temptation to let it flow freely, to stop holding back, to stop measuring and monitoring and controlling every flicker of emotion. It would be so easy. So natural. The primacy didn't want to destroy anything right now, it simply wanted to be, without constraints, without limitations, without the constant pressure of Harry's conscious mind holding it in check. But that was the trap, wasn't it? The primacy always started with reasonable desires. The previous wielders hadn't fallen because they woke up one morning and decided to annihilate civilizations. They'd fallen because the power's definition of reasonable expanded over time, and they'd expanded with it, until there was no line left between what they wanted and what the power demanded. I can't, Harry said through gritted teeth. I can feel the boundary, but every time I try to draw it clearly, the primacy pushes back. It doesn't want to be defined. It wants to define. Then let it define something. Not you, something external. Give it a target that isn't your own self-control. Harry opened his eyes. The mandala's light dimmed slightly as his concentration broke. What do you mean? Mina crouched in front of him, her dark eyes intent. The problem you're having is that you're trying to set boundaries on the primacy while it's still inside you, still integrated with your identity. It feels like self-mutilation. Of course the power resists. But what if you give it something outside yourself to define? Something that won't trigger that defensive reaction? Like what? A target. An object. Something you can practice boundary setting on without the primacy feeling like you're trying to cage it. Mina stood and crossed to one of her work tables, returning with a small glass orb. It was perfectly clear, empty of anything except a faint shimmer that might have been trapped air. This is a containment sphere. Standard warding equipment. It's designed to hold magical energies temporarily while a wardcaster shapes them. I want you to try to define it. Harry took the sphere. It was cool in his palm, lighter than it looked. Define it how? Any way you want. Tell it what it is. What it's not. Impose a boundary on it that wasn't there before. Harry closed his fingers around the sphere and reached for the primacy. This time, the power responded with something that felt almost like enthusiasm. It liked this idea, external definition, drawing lines on something other than itself. The golden light rose in his chest and flowed down his arm, and when it touched the glass sphere, the orb began to glow. What is this? He thought, and the primacy answered not in words but in understanding. The sphere was glass. The sphere was empty. The sphere was a container, designed to hold and release, to separate what was inside from what was outside. So make it something else, the primacy seemed to whisper. Define it differently. What else could it be? Harry thought about the Dursleys' cupboard. The darkness. The closeness. The feeling of being trapped in a space too small for his growing body. Without quite knowing why, he poured that memory into the sphere. The glass orb shuddered in his palm. And then it wasn't a sphere anymore. It was a cube. Perfectly square, its surfaces flat and precise, its corners sharp enough to cut. The glass had reformed itself as if it had always been a cube, as if the spherical shape had been a temporary aberration and this was its true form. Mina sucked in a breath. You just redefined its fundamental shape. That's not transfiguration. Transfiguration requires a wand and an incantation. You just told it to be something else, and it obeyed. Harry stared at the cube. The primacy was purring in his chest, delighted by the exercise. It had enjoyed that, the clean, decisive act of drawing a line between sphere and cube and declaring that the latter was now true. There was no moral weight to it, no ethical dimension. Just definition. Just boundary. Just the simple satisfaction of saying this, not that. Do it again, Mina said. Something more complex. Don't just change its shape, change its nature. Harry looked at the cube. The primacy was ready, eager, waiting to be given another task. He thought about what to do, what definition to impose, and his mind went to the most fundamental boundary he knew, the line between living and dead. No, the primacy seemed to say. Not that. That's too big. You're not ready for that. But there was a smaller boundary, one that had shaped his entire life. The line between seen and unseen. Between noticed and ignored. Between the boy in the cupboard and the boy who was invisible to the world. Make it unseen, Harry thought. The cube flickered. And then it was gone. Not transparent, gone. Harry could still feel it in his palm, still feel the cool weight of the glass, but his eyes insisted there was nothing there. The light passed through the space where it should have been without obstruction, without even a shimmer to mark its presence. Invisibility, Mina breathed. You didn't just hide it. You redefined its relationship with light. You told it that it wasn't something light could touch. Is that bad? It's extraordinary. Harry, do you understand what you just did? Invisibility is one of the most complex magical effects in existence. Disillusionment charms take years to master. Invisibility cloaks are priceless artifacts. And you just achieved perfect invisibility with a thought. Harry looked down at his empty palm. The primacy was still purring, but there was something else now, a faint edge of hunger. It wanted more. It wanted bigger challenges, grander definitions, lines drawn across the face of reality itself. The cube had been a snack. It was ready for a meal. I feel it, he said quietly. The pull. The urge to do more. To define something bigger. Mina's expression sharpened. That's the danger. The primacy will always want more. The key is learning to channel that hunger into productive directions instead of destructive ones. You gave it a task, redefining the sphere, and it accomplished that task without harming anyone. That's the path your parents wanted for you. Not suppression, but redirection. What if I can't find a productive direction when it really counts? What if I'm angry, or scared, and the only definitions I can think of are the ones that hurt people? Then you'll have me. Mina knelt in front of him again, her scarred hands covering his. And Cassiel, whether you like it or not. And the soul latch, which will warn us both if you start to lose control. You're not alone in this, Harry. That's the difference between you and every primacy wielder who came before. They faced the power alone. You don't have to. Harry looked at her, this young woman with her scarred hands and her fierce eyes, who had spent 7 years preparing for a child she'd never met, who had refused to evacuate when the custodians came because she believed in something his parents had started. She was strange and intense and more than a little terrifying, but she was also the first person besides his parents' shades who had looked at him and seen something other than a threat or a weapon or a burden. "Why do you care so much?" he asked. "You didn't know me. You barely knew my parents. Why spend 7 years researching something that might never have happened?" Mina was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it before. "When I was 13, there was an accident in my grandfather's workshop. A wand core, dragon heartstring, very volatile, ruptured during the bonding process. The backlash should have killed me. It didn't, because my grandfather threw himself in front of the blast. He survived, but his hands were never the same. He can still make wands, but the fine work, the delicate bonding, that's gone. That's why you became his apprentice. That's part of it. The other part is that after the accident, I became obsessed with boundaries. With the lines between magic and wielder, between power and vessel. Why had the dragon heartstring ruptured? Because the boundary between its magic and the wand's matrix wasn't stable. If I'd understood boundary magic better, I could have prevented it." She squeezed his hands. "Your mother came to me when I was 19. She was pregnant with you, and she was terrified, not of the primacy itself, but of what it might do to her child. She asked me if there was a way to stabilize the boundary between vessel and power. I didn't have an answer then. I've been looking for one ever since. And now? Now I think the answer was you all along. Not a ritual or a spell or a containment protocol. Just, you. A child who learned mercy in a cupboard, who chose compassion when cruelty would have been easier, who defined himself as something other than what his abusers told him he was." Mina released his hands and stood. "The primacy amplifies the heart that wields it. Your mother believed that. I believe it. And everything you've done since the seal broke suggests your heart is exactly what it needs to be." The golden light in the mandala flared. Harry felt the primacy surge, not with hunger this time, but with something that felt almost like recognition. It had heard Mina's words. It had understood them. And it was, waiting. Harry realized, with a jolt that made his breath catch, that the primacy wasn't just a force of definition. It was also a force of relationship. It wanted to connect. It wanted to understand. It had been alone for so long, passed from vessel to vessel, always feared and suppressed and eventually destroyed. But in Harry, it had found something different. Someone who didn't hate it. Someone who was trying to work with it instead of against it. "Thank you," Harry said. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to Mina or to the primacy or to both. "For believing I could be something other than a monster." "That's not belief," Mina said, and her fierce smile returned. "That's observation. Now, let's see if you can do something really impressive. I want you to try defining 2 things at once." The training continued. Harry worked through exercise after exercise, each one more complex than the last. He redefined the color of a book's cover, then the temperature of a cup of water, then the weight of a small iron weight that Mina produced from a drawer. With each success, the primacy grew more responsive, more attuned to his conscious direction. It was like learning a new language, the grammar of boundary setting, the vocabulary of definition. The power had always known this language, but Harry was only now learning to speak it fluently. But as the hours passed, Harry began to notice something strange. A pressure at the edges of his perception. A sensation like someone pressing against a window from the outside, trying to get in. "Do you feel that?" he asked, pausing in the middle of an exercise. Mina looked up from her notes. "Feel what?" "Something, pushing. Like there's a storm coming," or, the soul latch flared. Harry gasped as the connection to Cassiel blazed to life. It wasn't the warning he'd been told to expect, not the signal that the primacy was overwhelming him. It was something else. Something that felt like Cassiel's voice, urgent and distant, shouting words Harry couldn't quite make out. And then the world went white. Harry opened his eyes to ash. It was falling from a sky the color of old bruises, drifting down in lazy spirals that coated the ruined street in a fine gray powder. The buildings around him were familiar in a way that made his stomach clench. He knew that crooked chimney, that broken gate, that sign reading Privet Drive in letters that had half melted from whatever heat had swept through here. But the houses were shells, their windows blown out, their roofs collapsed, their gardens reduced to scorched earth. He was standing in the middle of the street. His bare feet left prints in the ash. The air was hot and dry and tasted like copper. "What is this?" he whispered. "The memory," a voice answered. It wasn't Cassiel. It wasn't Mina. It wasn't even the primacy, or not only the primacy. It was something older and stranger, something that spoke with the weight of absolute certainty. The memory of what was. The memory of what will be. The memory of what you will become. Harry turned in a circle, looking for the source of the voice. The street was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of life entirely. No birds. No insects. No sound except the whisper of falling ash and the distant groan of a building that hadn't quite finished collapsing. "I don't understand," he said. "The soul latch, I felt it trigger. Cassiel was trying to warn me about something. Cassiel cannot reach you here. This is a place between moments. A vision within a vision. The custodian leader showed you the past, cities that fell, wielders who lost control. But I am showing you the future." "Whose future?" "Yours. If you fail." The ash swirled, and the street dissolved around him. When it reformed, Harry was standing in a different place, a great hall with stone walls and floating candles and 4 long tables arranged in parallel lines. He recognized it from the chronicles of the primacy, from drawings his parents had included in their notes. Hogwarts. The school where his mother and father had met, where they'd learned magic, where they'd fallen in love. But this Hogwarts was dead. The candles had burned down to stubs. The tables were overturned, their benches shattered. The enchanted ceiling, which should have shown the night sky, was cracked open like an eggshell, revealing a roiling mass of darkness that wasn't quite clouds and wasn't quite smoke. And at the head of the hall, sitting on what remained of the staff table, was a figure that made Harry's heart stop. It was him. Older, maybe 17, maybe 20, but unmistakably him. The same dark hair, the same green eyes, the same lightning bolt scar on his forehead. But this Harry was different. His eyes glowed with golden light that didn't flicker or dim. His expression was calm, not angry, not cruel, but utterly, terrifyingly serene. He wore robes of deep crimson, and his hands rested on his knees as if he were meditating. "You came," the older Harry said. His voice was Harry's voice, but deeper, resonant with power that made the stones tremble. "I wasn't sure you would. The visions usually don't stabilize this quickly." "What are you?" Harry demanded. "What is this place?" "This place is the end point. The logical conclusion of every choice you're about to make." The older Harry stood, and Harry saw that his feet didn't quite touch the floor. He was hovering, suspended by the power that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. I am what you become if you let the primacy guide you instead of guiding it. If you accept its definitions instead of imposing your own. If you let mercy wither and justice curdle into something indistinguishable from tyranny. You're not me. I'm not you yet. Whether I become you depends on what happens in the next few days. Whether you choose control or surrender. Whether you choose the hard path, the one your parents died to give you, or the easy one. Harry felt the primacy stir in his chest. It recognized this place. Recognized this older version of himself. And it was afraid. Not of the older Harry, of something else. Something that was coming. I won't become you, Harry said. I already chose. In the Dursleys' hallway. I could have burned them, and I didn't. I know. The older Harry's serene expression flickered, and for a moment, Harry saw something else beneath it, grief, or regret, or maybe just exhaustion. I made that choice too. In my timeline, in my version of events, I also chose mercy. I also resisted the primacy's whispers. I also believed I was different from the wielders who came before. Then what happened? What always happens? The older Harry gestured, and the ruined great hall dissolved around them, replaced by another scene, a courtroom, its benches packed with figures Harry didn't recognize, all of them staring up at a raised dais where the older Harry sat in judgment. I tried to do good. I used the primacy to stop the Death Eaters who escaped justice after Voldemort's fall. I unmade them, not killing, but redefining. I took away their capacity for cruelty, their desire for power, their willingness to harm. I made them into better people. The scene shifted. Harry saw figures, former Death Eaters, he assumed, living quiet, peaceful lives. Gardening. Reading. Playing with children. They looked happy. They looked good. That doesn't seem wrong, Harry said. It didn't seem wrong to me either. The older Harry's voice was heavy. At first. But then I started seeing cruelty everywhere. People who weren't Death Eaters, just ordinary witches and wizards who were selfish, or thoughtless, or casually unkind. And the primacy whispered that I could fix them too. That I could make the whole world good. That it would be a mercy. The scene shifted again. More people being redefined. More fixes. And then more. And more. Until the courtroom was packed with petitioners begging for transformation, and the older Harry was granting their requests with the same serene expression, and somewhere along the way, the petitioners had stopped being volunteers. I started with the guilty, the older Harry said. Then the unkind. Then the merely inconvenient. And by the time I realized what I'd become, I'd already redefined half the wizarding world. I'd made them into what I thought they should be, and in doing so, I destroyed who they actually were. That's not mercy, Harry said. That's control. Yes. That's what the primacy does if you let it. It takes your best impulses and amplifies them until they become indistinguishable from your worst. You want justice? It gives you the power to punish every wrongdoer. You want peace? It gives you the power to silence every dissenting voice. You want love? It gives you the power to make everyone love you, whether they want to or not. Harry looked at the older version of himself, the serene face, the glowing eyes, the hands that had unmade countless souls. You're trying to scare me. To make me think resistance is hopeless. I'm trying to warn you. The older Harry stepped closer, and for the first time, Harry saw cracks in his composure, fine lines of strain around his eyes, a tremor in his hovering form. The custodians showed you the past because they wanted you to know what the primacy does. I'm showing you the future because I want you to know it doesn't have to be inevitable. You can choose differently. You can hold on to the mercy you found in the Dursleys' hallway and never let it go. How do you know? If you're what I become, I know because I've seen the other branches. The other possibilities. The timelines where you succeed. The older Harry's voice cracked. They exist. They're real. They're just harder to reach. The version of him that falls is the easiest path, the one where he gives into exhaustion, or fear, or the simple desire to stop fighting. The version that survives requires something else. Something I lost somewhere along the way. What? But before the older Harry could answer, the vision shattered. Harry was thrown backward, tumbling through darkness that pressed against him from all sides. He heard screaming, Mina's voice, high and desperate, calling his name. He felt the soul latch burning against the primacy in his chest, Cassiel's presence slamming against the boundaries of whatever trap had closed around him. And then he was back in Ollivander's basement, gasping on the stone floor, the resonance array flickering wildly around him. Harry. Mina was kneeling beside him, her scarred hands gripping his shoulders. Harry, can you hear me? What happened? You froze, and your eyes went gold, and I couldn't reach you. I'm here. Harry's voice came out as a croak. I'm back. What? How long was I gone? Gone. You didn't go anywhere. You were right here the whole time, you just stopped responding. For about 20 seconds. 20 seconds. It had felt like hours in the vision world. Days, maybe. He'd walked through the ashes of Privet Drive and the ruins of Hogwarts, spoken with a version of himself that had become a monster, and only 20 seconds had passed in the real world. The soul latch, Harry said, pushing himself upright. Something triggered it. Something attacked me. Not attacked. The voice came from the staircase, and Harry looked up to see Cassiel descending into the basement. The custodian leader's weathered face was drawn, his pale eyes sharp with concern. The soul latch detected an intrusion. Something entered your mind, something that wasn't the primacy and wasn't me. The vision, Harry said. I saw myself. Older. A version of me that fell. He showed me what happens if I lose control. Cassiel and Mina exchanged a look that Harry didn't understand. That shouldn't be possible, Cassiel said slowly. Visions of that nature, prophetic manifestations triggered by the primacy itself, they've been documented, but never this early in a wielder's development. The power shouldn't have enough integration with your consciousness to generate that kind of experience. It wasn't the primacy. Harry was certain of this, though he couldn't have explained why. The primacy was in the vision with me. It was afraid. Whatever created that place, whatever showed me that future, it was something else. Something older. Cassiel went very still. Older than the primacy? I don't know. Maybe not older. But, other. Separate. Harry thought about the voice he'd heard at the beginning of the vision, the one that had spoken with the weight of absolute certainty. It said it was showing me a memory. A memory of what would be. A memory of the future, Mina murmured. That's not prophecy. That's something else entirely. Prophecy is possibility. Memory is certainty. If something showed you a memory of the future, it was claiming that future is fixed. Is it? Harry asked. Is that what I'm going to become? No. Cassiel's voice was firm, and Harry was surprised to hear genuine conviction in it. The future isn't fixed. I've lived long enough to know that. Whatever showed you that vision, it was lying, or at least, it was showing you only one possibility, the one it wants you to believe is inevitable. But why? What would gain from making me think I'm doomed to fall? Cassiel didn't answer immediately. He was studying the resonance array, his pale eyes tracing the lines of the mandala that were still flickering with golden light. Mina, what exactly were you doing when the vision triggered? We were practicing boundary setting. Harry was defining objects, a containment sphere, some books, a metal weight. He was doing brilliantly. Mina's voice was defensive. There was nothing dangerous about it. Define, brilliantly. He turned a glass sphere into a perfect cube just by thinking about it. He made it completely invisible. He was starting to work with multiple simultaneous definitions when the vision hit. Cassiel's weathered face didn't change, but Harry saw something flicker in his pale eyes, something that looked almost like fear. Simultaneous definitions. At 7 years old. After less than a day of training. Is that bad? Harry asked. It's unprecedented. Cassiel knelt beside the resonance array, his long fingers tracing the mandala's lines. The previous primacy wielders took months to achieve single-definition control. Years for simultaneous definition. The power fights back against being directed, it wants to flow its own way, define its own targets. The fact that you're able to channel it so precisely, so quickly. Means what? Means your parents' integration was even more successful than I feared. Cassiel looked up at him. The primacy isn't just woven into your magical core. It's woven into your fundamental sense of identity. You're not fighting it because, on some level, you don't perceive it as separate from yourself. That's why you can direct it so easily. That's good, isn't it? Mina said. If he can direct it, he can control it. Control isn't the issue. The issue is that if the primacy is fully integrated into his identity, then any corruption of the primacy is automatically corruption of his identity. He won't notice himself changing because the change will feel like his own natural development. Cassiel stood, his expression grim. The previous wielders had warning signs. They felt the primacy as something external pushing against their will. But Harry won't have that warning. When he starts to fall, if he starts to fall, he won't know it's happening. Harry thought about the older version of himself in the vision. The serene expression. The calm certainty. The absolute conviction that he was doing the right thing. He said the same thing. The older me. He said he'd resisted at first, but then it got easier to stop resisting. He didn't notice when mercy became control. That's why the vision happened. Mina's voice was sharp with sudden understanding. Whatever sent it, it wasn't trying to scare you. It was trying to warn you. It was giving you the external perspective you can't get from inside the primacy's integration. Or it was trying to push you toward despair, Cassiel countered. To make you believe the fall is inevitable so you'll stop fighting it. Both could be true, Harry said quietly. The vision was real. The future it showed me, that's one possible future. But the older me also said there were other branches. Other possibilities. He said some versions of me succeed. Cassiel and Mina both looked at him. He said that? Mina asked. He said the version that survives requires something he lost along the way. He didn't get to tell me what before the vision broke. The basement was very quiet. The resonance array had stopped flickering, its lines fading back to inert stone. Harry could feel the primacy coiled in his chest, still afraid, still unsettled by whatever had invaded the training session, but also, thoughtful. The power had seen the vision too. It had seen what it could become. And for the first time since awakening, Harry felt something from the primacy that wasn't hunger or fear or the desperate need for freedom. He felt resolve. We need to figure out what sent that vision, Cassiel said finally. If there's something out there that can breach the soul latch and insert experiences directly into your consciousness, it's a threat we haven't accounted for. Could it be the custodians? Mina asked. One of the factions that wants Harry dead? No. The custodians don't have this kind of capability. None of the magical species we work with do. Cassiel's expression was troubled. There are only a handful of entities in recorded history that could create a true future memory vision, and most of them are either extinct or sealed beyond the veil. The veil, Harry repeated. The word resonated with something in the chronicles of the primacy, a passage he'd skimmed but not fully understood. What's the veil? Cassiel and Mina exchanged another look. This one was longer, weighted with something that felt like dread. The veil is the boundary between realms, Cassiel said slowly. The ultimate boundary. It separates the world of the living from the world of the dead, the material plane from the immaterial, the known from the unknown. It was created at the beginning of time by forces that predate even the primacy. And the primacy can affect it, Harry said. It wasn't a question. That's what the custodians are really afraid of. Not that I'll become a tyrant. That I'll break the veil. The prophecy said the primacy's return would collapse the walls between realms. The veil is the most important of those walls. If it breaks, if the boundary between life and death dissolves, the consequences would be catastrophic. The dead would walk. The living would lose their anchor to the material world. Reality itself would become fluid. Harry thought about the vision. The ruined Hogwarts. The cracked sky. The darkness that wasn't quite clouds and wasn't quite smoke. Something's already on the other side of the veil. Something that can send visions to people on this side. That's not possible. The veil is absolute. Nothing comes back through it. Then maybe it's not coming through. Maybe it's reaching through. Pushing against the boundary just enough to touch me. Harry stood, his legs unsteady. The primacy was stirring again, but it wasn't hungry now. It was alert. Watchful. It had sensed something in the vision that Harry was only now beginning to understand. It was in the future. The older me. He wasn't alone. There was something else in that cracked sky, something huge and empty and hungry. He was fighting it, or serving it, or... I don't know. But it was there. Cassiel's weathered face had gone very pale. What did it look like? I couldn't see it clearly. It was like a hole in the sky. A place where light stopped being light and sound stopped being sound. It was. Harry struggled for words. It was the opposite of definition. The opposite of boundary. It was what's left when all the lines are erased. The hollow, Cassiel whispered. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. It can't be. The hollow was sealed beyond the veil at the dawn of creation. It can't be reaching through. What's the hollow? Mina demanded. An entity. A force. The only thing in existence that the primacy cannot define. Cassiel's voice was distant, as if he were reciting something from memory. When the universe was formless, when there was no boundary between what was and what was not, the hollow was everything. It was the chaos before definition. The primacy drew the first line, the first boundary, and in doing so, created the hollow as its opposite. The primacy is the power of definition. The hollow is the power of undefinition. It unmakes what the primacy makes. It erases boundaries. It returns everything to the formless chaos it came from. And it's reaching through the veil, Harry said. It's been reaching through for a while, hasn't it? That's why the seal broke when it did. That's why the vision happened. It's not just the custodians who felt the primacy awaken. The hollow felt it too. Cassiel didn't answer. He was staring at the resonance array, his expression unreadable. But Harry could feel the soul latch vibrating with tension, the custodian leader's emotions bleeding through the connection in a way that had never happened before. Cassiel was afraid. Genuinely, terribly afraid. This changes things, Cassiel said finally. If the hollow is active, if it's reaching through the veil, then containing you is no longer the priority. The hollow is an extinction-level threat. It's the end of everything. The custodians were founded to prevent its return, millennia ago, before we got sidetracked by the primacy manifestations. You forgot, Harry said quietly. You spent so long hunting primacy wielders that you forgot what you were originally supposed to be protecting against. We didn't forget. We just stopped believing it was a real threat. Cassiel's voice was heavy with something that sounded like shame. The hollow was sealed at the dawn of creation. 10,000 years ago. 20,000. Longer. It's never shown any sign of activity. We assumed the seal was permanent. But the prophecy said the primacy's return would collapse the walls between realms. What if that wasn't a warning about me? What if it was a warning about the hollow? What if the primacy awakened because the hollow was already pushing through, and the seal on my power was the only thing keeping it contained? Cassiel's pale eyes met his. You're suggesting the primacy is a defense mechanism. That it awakens in response to the hollow's activity. It makes sense, Mina said slowly. The primacy is the power of boundary setting. The hollow is the power of boundary erasure. They're natural opposites. If the hollow started pushing against the veil, the primacy would awaken to push back. But the previous wielders didn't fight the hollow. They became tyrants. Because they didn't know what they were supposed to be fighting. Harry's voice was very quiet. They felt the primacy's hunger for definition, its drive to set boundaries, and they interpreted it as a hunger for control. For power. But what if it was a hunger for confrontation? What if the primacy was trying to prepare them to face the hollow, and they kept misinterpreting its impulses? The basement was very quiet. The resonance array had gone completely dark. Harry could feel the primacy pulsing in his chest, and for the first time, the rhythm felt different. It wasn't a war drum. It wasn't a predatory stalk. It was a warning bell, ringing across the boundaries between worlds. If you're right, Cassiel said slowly, then everything we thought we knew about the primacy is wrong. The custodians have been killing the very people who might have been able to stop the hollow. We've been weakening the world's defenses for millennia. You didn't know. That's not an excuse. Cassiel straightened, and Harry saw something change in his weathered face. The ancient weariness was still there, but beneath it, something was kindling. Something that looked almost like hope. I need to contact the custodian leadership. If the hollow is active, our entire operational framework needs to change immediately. We need to shift from containment to preparation. And what about Harry? Mina asked. The binding, the training, the binding stays for now. The training becomes even more critical. If Harry is right, if the primacy is the natural counterforce to the hollow, then he's not a threat we need to contain. He's a weapon we need to forge. Cassiel looked at Harry, and his pale eyes were intense. I've spent my entire existence hunting your kind. I've killed 7 primacy wielders, believing each time that I was saving the world from catastrophe. If I was wrong, if I was making the world more vulnerable instead, then everything I've done is monstrous. It's not monstrous if you genuinely believed you were right, Harry said. The Dursleys genuinely believed I was a freak. They were wrong, but their belief was real. Intent matters. Does it? I killed people. People who might have been able to stop what's coming. You didn't know what was coming. Now you do. Harry stepped toward Cassiel, and the primacy pulsed warmly in his chest. The older me in the vision, the one who fell, he said something. He said the version of me that survives requires something he lost along the way. I think he was talking about this. About the ability to see the hollow as the real enemy instead of fighting everyone who's afraid of me. Cassiel stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, the ancient custodian laughed. It was a dry, rusty sound, as if he was out of practice. You're 7 years old. You've had the primacy for less than a day. And you're already giving me moral philosophy. I had a lot of time to think in the cupboard. The cupboard. Cassiel shook his head slowly. I'm going to spend the rest of my existence trying to make up for what you went through. You know that, don't you? Even if we stop the hollow. Even if you master the primacy. I'll never be able to look at myself in a mirror without remembering that I knew about a child being abused and did nothing. You can start by helping me figure out how to fight the hollow, Harry said. Everything else can wait. Cassiel nodded slowly. The sanctuary has 2 more days. By the time it ends, I'll have the custodians reorganized. We'll need to contact the Ministry of Magic, the other magical governments, the goblins, maybe even the centaurs and the merfolk. If the hollow is returning, this isn't a custodian problem. It's a world problem. And in the meantime, Mina said, we keep training. The better Harry understands the primacy, the better chance we have of using it against the hollow when the time comes. The resonance array flared back to life around Harry's feet. The primacy in his chest was no longer afraid. It was ready, eager, even. It had been waiting for this moment. Waiting for someone to understand what it was really for. Let's get back to work, Harry said. Show me how to define something bigger than a glass sphere. Mina's fierce smile returned. Bigger how? Harry thought about the hollow. The hunger in the cracked sky. The darkness that erased boundaries instead of creating them. I want to learn how to define a place where the hollow can't exist. A boundary it can't cross. A line between what it can touch and what it can't. That's advanced boundary setting, Mina said, but her eyes were bright with excitement. We'd need to start with smaller protected spaces and work up, then we start. Harry looked at Cassiel. You said the custodians are at war. Teach me to be a soldier. Cassiel's weathered face cracked into something that was almost a smile. You really are your parents' son. He turned and headed back up the stairs, his long strides eating up the distance. Harry heard him pause at the top. I'll send word when the custodians are ready to brief you. Train hard. If the hollow sent that vision, it means it's aware of you. It knows the primacy has awakened. And it will be coming. Then he was gone, and Harry was left alone with Mina in the basement, surrounded by books and instruments and the golden glow of the resonance array. Right, Mina said, clapping her scarred hands together. Protected boundary formation. This is going to be harder than anything we've done so far. You're not just defining an object, you're defining a zone. A territory. A place where the rules are different from the world around it. Like the sanctuary at Gringotts. Exactly. The right of sanctuary creates a protected zone where certain actions are impossible. What you're proposing is similar, but with the hollow as the thing being kept out instead of physical harm. Mina began sketching in the air with her wand, leaving trails of silver light that formed a diagram. The principle is the same, you're drawing a boundary and defining what can and cannot cross it. The difference is scale and specificity. Show me. The training resumed. Harry worked until his muscles ached and his eyes burned and the primacy in his chest was vibrating with exhaustion. He drew boundaries around pebbles, around books, around the resonance array itself. He defined spaces where sound couldn't enter, then spaces where light couldn't leave, then spaces where the air itself was held in perfect stasis. Each exercise pushed him further, demanded more precision, more control, more clarity about exactly what he was defining and why. And through it all, the primacy was changing. The hunger was still there, but it was focused now. Directed. The power had found a purpose beyond simple expression, a reason for all the boundary setting, all the definition, all the lines it wanted to draw across the face of reality. It was preparing for a fight. It was gathering its strength for the confrontation it had been born for. By the time the candles in the basement had burned down to stubs, Harry could define a protected zone the size of a dinner plate, a space where he had declared that nothing could enter without his permission. It wasn't big enough to protect a person, but it was a start. You're progressing faster than any wielder in recorded history, Mina said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. At this rate, by the time the sanctuary ends, you might actually be ready for what's coming. What is coming? Harry asked. The hollow, what does it actually do? Cassiel said it unmakes things, but what does that mean? Mina was quiet for a moment. I've only read fragments about the hollow. Most of the records were lost during the various dark ages. But from what I've pieced together, the hollow doesn't just destroy things. It unmakes them. It erases the definitions that make them what they are. A person touched by the hollow doesn't die, they become undefined. They lose the boundaries between self and world, between body and air, between consciousness and void. They just dissolve into the chaos the hollow carries with it. Like what I felt in the vision. The cracked sky. The hunger. Yes. Mina knelt in front of him again, her scarred hands on his shoulders. Harry, what you're trying to do, defining a protected zone against an entity that literally erases definitions, it's like trying to build a wall out of water. The hollow is the opposite of everything the primacy is. Fighting it directly might not be possible. Then I'll fight it indirectly. I'll define a boundary it can't cross. I'll make a place where it can't exist. And if that doesn't work? Harry met her dark eyes. Then I'll find something that does. My parents didn't die so I could give up. Mina stared at him for a long moment. Then she pulled him into a hug, awkward and fierce and completely unexpected. Harry stiffened, not used to being touched, not used to being held. But after a moment, he relaxed. The primacy purred in his chest, responding to the contact, to the definition of friendship and trust and something that might one day become family. We're going to figure this out, Mina said, her voice muffled against his hair. You and me and Cassiel and anyone else we can drag into this. We're going to stop the hollow, and then we're going to show the whole wizarding world that the primacy isn't a curse. It's a gift. Your parents' gift. And they didn't give it to you so you could die fighting an ancient chaos entity before you've even had a chance to live. Harry didn't answer. He just held on, feeling the primacy settle into a steady, watchful rhythm, and tried to believe that she was right. Above them, in the streets of Diagon Alley, the custodian patrols continued their watch. And far beyond them, pressing against the veil at the edge of reality, something vast and hungry and utterly patient waited for the moment when the boundaries would finally break. Chapter 5, The Lock and the Key. The sanctuary ended at dawn on the third day. Harry stood at the threshold of Gringotts' bronze doors, watching the sun rise over Diagon Alley. The streets were still empty, the shopkeepers hadn't returned, the residents were still sheltering wherever civilians sheltered when custodian strike forces occupied their neighborhoods, but the silence felt different now. Heavier. Charged with something that made the primacy coil and uncoil beneath his skin like a serpent tasting the air. It's coming, he said. Cassiel stood beside him, his weathered face unreadable in the pale morning light. Behind them, the goblin guards had withdrawn to the inner halls, leaving the atrium empty. Griphook was somewhere in the deep vaults, coordinating with his clan leaders about evacuation protocols that Harry hoped wouldn't be necessary. The hollow, Cassiel said. It wasn't a question. I can feel it. Pushing against the veil. It's been pushing harder for the past few hours, like it knows the sanctuary is ending. Harry pressed his palm against the bronze door, feeling the cold metal vibrate with wards that had stood for centuries. It's not going to wait for me to come to it. It's going to break through. Then we don't wait either. Cassiel turned to face the assembled custodians in the atrium. They'd been arriving throughout the night, more grey-robed figures than Harry had seen before, representing species and magical traditions he didn't recognize. The werewolf, Theron, stood with a contingent of his pack, their yellow eyes gleaming in the shadows. Selwyn, the ancient-eyed witch, had brought a circle of Vila whose hair rippled like fire even in the still air. There were other beings too, a delegation of goblins in ceremonial armor, a cluster of wizards from the Ministry's Department of Mysteries who defied their superiors to respond to Cassiel's summons, and one enormous figure wrapped entirely in bandages that Harry suspected was something called a mummy, though he'd been too polite to ask. We have perhaps an hour before the veil ruptures, Cassiel continued, his quiet voice carrying easily across the marble floor. The Hollow's approach is focused on London, specifically, on Harry. The primacy's awakening has drawn it like a beacon. Our objective is twofold: protect Harry until he's ready to confront the Hollow, and minimize civilian casualties when the breach occurs. When, not if, Theron growled. You're so certain containment has failed. The veil has been weakening for decades. The primacy's awakening accelerated the process, but the Hollow was already pressing against the boundaries. Cassiel's pale eyes swept the room. We can stand here debating whether the custodians should have noticed sooner, or we can prepare for what's about to happen. I know which I'd prefer. The werewolf subsided, though his expression remained mutinous. Harry had learned, over the past 2 days, that Theron's hostility wasn't personal, or rather, it was personal, but it stemmed from a history Harry was only beginning to understand. The werewolf's pack had been decimated during the last primacy manifestation, 3,000 years ago. He'd been fighting wielders of the primacy since before human civilization had invented the wheel. I need to be somewhere open, Harry said. Somewhere I can draw boundaries without walls getting in the way. The hollow erases definitions. If I'm trapped in a building when it manifests, I won't be able to establish a protected zone before it reaches me. I know a place. Mina appeared at Harry's elbow, her dark curls even more disheveled than usual. She'd been up all night running calculations, trying to determine the optimal configuration for the boundary wards they'd been practicing. Stonehenge. It's a natural convergence point, ley lines crossing, ancient boundary magic already embedded in the stones. If you're going to define a zone against the Hollow, that's where you'll have the most power. That's 2 hours from London, Selwyn said. If the Hollow breaches in 1 hour, then we buy him time. Cassiel's voice was flat. We fight a delaying action. Draw the Hollow's attention away from Harry long enough for him to reach the convergence point and establish a defensive position. You're asking us to die. Theron's growl was low and dangerous. To throw ourselves at an entity that literally unmakes whatever it touches, just to buy a few minutes for a child who might not even be able to stop it. I'm asking you to do what the custodians were founded to do. Cassiel met the werewolf's yellow eyes without flinching. We've spent millennia hunting primacy wielders because we believed they were the greatest threat to the boundary between realms. We were wrong. The Hollow is the threat. It always has been. And if we don't stop it now, there won't be any realms left to protect. A ripple of unease ran through the assembled custodians. Harry felt the primacy pulse in response, not with hunger, but with something that felt almost like recognition. The power understood what Cassiel was asking. It understood the weight of sacrifice. And it was grateful. I'll go to Stonehenge, Harry said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. I'll establish the protected zone. But I need enough time to get there and set up the wards. 10 minutes at the site, minimum. Can you give me that? Cassiel looked at him. The ancient custodian's weathered face was unreadable, but Harry felt the soul etch tremble with emotion, fear, resolve, and something that might have been pride. We'll give you 20, Cassiel said. And we'll make sure the Hollow knows exactly where you're going. The evacuation of London began at 7 in the morning. Harry didn't see it happen. He was already being bundled into a ministry vehicle that Cassiel had commandeered, a black car that looked ordinary on the outside but whose interior was larger than the entire Dursley house. Mina climbed in beside him, clutching a satchel full of instruments and reference books. 2 custodian guards took the front seats, and then they were speeding through streets that were suddenly, impossibly empty. How are they clearing the city so fast? Harry asked, pressing his face against the window. The streets of London streamed past, buildings, bridges, the silver ribbon of the Thames, and everywhere, there were signs of hasty departure. Abandoned cars. Open doors. A single child's bicycle lying on its side in the middle of an intersection. The ministry has evacuation protocols for magical emergencies, Mina said. They've been refining them since Grindelwald. Muggle-repelling wards, confusion charms, coordinated apparition points. Most of the population is already being shifted to safe zones outside the city. Most of them. There's always someone who gets left behind. Someone the wards miss, or someone who resists the compulsion charms. We can't save everyone. Mina's voice was tight. We just have to save enough. Harry thought about the Dursleys. They'd been evacuated too. Cassiel had confirmed it, though his expression when Harry asked had been carefully neutral. Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley were in a ministry safe house in the countryside, their memories of the past 3 days modified, their understanding of what was happening limited to a vague sense of terrorist threat. They'd never know that their nephew had been at the center of it all. Maybe that was for the best. Harry wasn't sure he wanted them to know. The car crossed the Thames and headed west, the buildings thinning as they left central London. Harry could feel the primacy stretching within him, reaching towards something he couldn't quite perceive. It was like standing on a beach and feeling the tide go out, a sense of something vast and invisible retreating, gathering strength for the wave that was about to crash. "The veil," he said. "I can feel it. Not the hollow, the veil itself. It's straining." Mina looked up from her instruments. "What does it feel like?" "Like a door that's been locked for too long. The hinges are rusting. The wood is cracking. And something on the other side is pushing." The car accelerated. The sky outside the windows was changing, the pale dawn light taking on a strange, phosphorescent quality that made everything look underwater. Harry had seen that light before, in the vision the Hollow had sent him. The cracked sky above the ruined Hogwarts. The darkness that wasn't quite clouds and wasn't quite smoke. It was coming. Stonehenge rose from the Salisbury plain like a crown of broken teeth. The ancient stones were grey in the strange light, their surfaces covered in lichen and the faint traces of carvings that predated any human language Harry recognized. The car stopped at the edge of the monument's perimeter, and Harry climbed out onto grass that was already beginning to frost, despite the summer morning. 10 minutes, Mina said, scrambling out behind him. "Cassiel said he'd buy us 20, but we should assume we have less." Harry walked toward the stone circle. The primacy was surging now, responding to the convergence of ley lines that Mina had described. He could feel them beneath his bare feet, rivers of power flowing through the earth, crossing and recrossing in patterns that had been old when the first humans had raised these stones. The monument wasn't just a calendar or a temple. It was a boundary marker. A declaration that this place was different from the places around it. "Of course," Harry murmured. "The stones are a definition. A line between sacred and profane. Between the world of the living and something else." "That's the theory," Mina said, spreading her instruments on the grass. "Archaeomagical surveys suggest Stonehenge was built by an early primacy wielder. Someone who understood boundary magic intuitively but didn't have the vocabulary to describe it." Harry entered the stone circle. The moment he crossed the threshold, the primacy blazed to life. Golden light poured from his skin, illuminating the ancient stones, and for a moment, Harry saw them as they had been when they were first raised, not grey and weathered, but white and gleaming, their surfaces polished to a mirror shine, their arrangement precisely calibrated to channel the boundary magic of the earth itself. "Yes," the primacy whispered. "This is a good place. A strong place. We can work here." Harry knelt in the center of the circle and pressed his palms against the earth. "Okay," he said. "Let's define a boundary." The training with Mina had prepared him for this. The exercises with the glass sphere, the books, the metal weights, all of them had been practiced for this moment. Defining a protected zone against the Hollow was the same principle, just on a vastly larger scale. Instead of defining a pebble as invisible, he was going to define a space as impermeable. Instead of drawing a line between what light could and couldn't touch, he was drawing a line between what the Hollow could and couldn't unmake. The primacy flowed into the earth beneath him. Harry felt it spread outward through the ley lines, following the ancient patterns carved into the land. The stones began to hum, a sound so low it was more felt than heard, vibrating through his bones and teeth. He defined the circle as a boundary. He defined the air within it as separate from the air without. He defined the space itself as real in a way that the Hollow's chaos was not. "It's working," Mina breathed. "The wards are stabilizing. I can see them forming, golden lines in the ultraviolet spectrum." Harry didn't answer. He was too deep in the working to spare attention for speech. The boundary was taking shape around him, layer upon layer of definition, each one reinforcing the last. He told the stones that they were solid. He told the ground that it was here. He told the sky above the circle that it was closed, that nothing could enter this space without his permission, not light, not sound, not the formless chaos of the hollow. But even as he worked, he felt the pressure building. The veil was straining harder now, the hollow's presence bearing down on the boundary between worlds. It was like trying to build a sandcastle while the tide was coming in. Every definition he established was immediately challenged by the anti-definition pressing against it from the other side. "It knows," Harry gasped. "The hollow, it knows what I'm doing. It's pushing back. Keep going." Mina shouted. "The convergence is amplifying your power, you're stronger here than you would be anywhere else. Just hold the boundary." The sky above Stonehenge began to crack. It started as a hairline fracture, a thread of darkness against the phosphorescent clouds. Then it widened, and Harry saw what lay beyond, not space, not void, but something that was actively hostile to the concept of space and void. It was the absence of definition itself, the chaos that had existed before the primacy drew the first line between what was and what was not. And it was hungry. The hollow poured through the crack like smoke through a broken window. It wasn't a creature, Harry understood that immediately. It wasn't even really an entity in the way that humans understood entities. It was a condition. A state of being. The active, aggressive absence of boundaries, spreading across the sky like an infection. Where it touched, things began to dissolve. Not dissolve in the way that acid dissolved things, or fire consumed things. The hollow didn't destroy. It undefined. A bird caught at the edge of the spreading chaos didn't die, it simply stopped being a bird. The boundaries between its feathers and its flesh, between its body and the air, between its consciousness and the void, all of them collapsed simultaneously. What remained was a smear of something that might once have been alive, rapidly losing coherence as the hollow's influence spread. "Merlin's mercy," Mina whispered. The hollow kept coming. It flowed across Salisbury Plain, erasing the grass, the trees, the scattered farmhouses in the distance. Harry felt each dissolution as a pulse of wrongness in the primacy, the power screaming in protest as definitions it had established millennia ago were violently revoked. And then the custodians arrived. They came from the east, a spearhead of grey-robed figures led by Cassiel himself. The ancient custodian had abandoned his usual restraint, his robes were gone, replaced by armor that looked like it had been forged from starlight, and in his hands was a weapon that Harry couldn't quite look at directly. It was a sword, or maybe a staff, or maybe something that existed in more dimensions than his eyes could perceive. Whatever it was, it blazed with the same boundary magic that pulsed in Harry's chest. "For the boundary!" Cassiel shouted, and his voice carried across the plain like a thunderclap. "For the realms that were and the realms that will be. Hold the line." The custodians spread out in a semicircle between Stonehenge and the advancing hollow. Theron's werewolves transformed, their human shapes flowing into wolf forms that were larger and more terrible than any natural wolf. The Vila sang, their voices weaving a barrier of sound that pushed back against the hollow's silence. The ministry wizards cast spells that Harry had never seen before, ancient wards, forgotten protections, incantations in languages that hadn't been spoken since the first magical civilizations rose and fell. And Cassiel met the hollow head-on. Harry couldn't watch, he was still deep in the boundary working, still layering definitions onto the stone circle, but he felt the collision. The primacy screamed in his chest as Cassiel's weapon struck the leading edge of the chaos. For a moment, the hollow's advance stopped. Cassiel had drawn a boundary directly in its path, a declaration that this far and no further, and the hollow, for the first time in its ancient existence, had encountered something that could say no. "Harry!" Mina's voice was sharp. "The wards, they're flickering." Harry dragged his attention back to the stone circle. The boundary he'd been building was destabilizing. Not because the hollow was attacking it directly, but because the hollow's mere presence was eroding the definitions he'd established. It was like trying to maintain a sandcastle while the ocean was actively trying to unmake the concept of sand. I need more power, Harry gritted out. The convergence isn't enough. The hollow is too strong. What about the resonant stone? The ring your parents left you. Harry had forgotten about it. The white gold band was still on his finger, its captured firelight pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He'd been wearing it since Gringotts, but he'd never actively used it. The stone was a fragment of the primacy's original manifestation, preserved from the time of Ignotus Peveril himself. Using it would amplify his power, but it would also make him more visible to the hollow. Visibility didn't matter anymore. The hollow already knew exactly where he was. Harry pressed his thumb against the resonant stone and opened himself to its power. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The fragment of the original primacy recognized its descendant and surged to join it, doubling the power flowing through Harry's veins. The golden light around him intensified until he was glowing like a small sun, and the boundary he'd been building snapped into sharp focus. He could see every definition he'd established, every line he'd drawn, every boundary he'd declared. They were no longer abstract concepts, they were physical realities, visible as threads of golden light woven through the stone circle and the earth beneath. And beyond them, he could see the hollow. Not as the formless chaos it appeared to be, but as what it truly was. The anti-definition. The unmaking. The force that had existed before the primacy drew the first line and that had been trying ever since to erase that line and return everything to the void. I know you, Harry thought, and the primacy sang in response. I know what you are. And I know what you're not. You're not inevitable. You're not unstoppable. You're not the end of everything. You're just, the other side of the boundary. The thing that exists outside the lines. And lines can be redrawn. He poured that understanding into the boundary working. The golden threads around Stonehenge blazed brighter, weaving themselves into a dome of light that covered the entire monument. Within that dome, Harry defined reality as real. He defined the hollow as excluded. He drew a line that said, this far, no further. This space, not yours. This world, not yours to unmake. The hollow screamed. It wasn't a sound, the hollow couldn't make sound, because sound required boundaries between vibrations. But Harry felt it nonetheless, a psychic shriek of rage and hunger that reverberated through the primacy. The hollow had never been denied before. It had never encountered a boundary it couldn't erode, a definition it couldn't dissolve. And now, in the heart of an ancient monument on a small island in the North Atlantic, a 7-year-old boy had told it no. The chaos pressing against the dome intensified. Harry felt the hollow throwing itself against his boundary, trying to find cracks in the definitions, trying to erode the lines he'd drawn. It was like holding back the ocean with his bare hands, exhausting, impossible, sustainable only because the primacy was burning through him like fire through dry grass. Harry! Mina was shouting. The custodians, they're falling. Harry looked up. Beyond the golden dome, the battle was turning. Cassiel was still holding his line, his impossible weapon blazing with boundary magic, but the other custodians were being overwhelmed. Theron's werewolves were being driven back, their wolf forms flickering as the hollow's chaos eroded the boundaries between human and beast. The Vila's song had been silenced, Harry couldn't see what had happened to them. And the ministry wizards were retreating, their ancient wards crumbling under the hollow's relentless pressure. We can't hold this position. Cassiel's voice cut through the chaos, directed at Harry. The hollow is focusing on the dome. It knows you're the real threat. I don't know how much longer we can keep it distracted. Harry felt the truth of Cassiel's words in the pressure against his boundary. The hollow had stopped trying to advance across the plain. Instead, it was concentrating its entire being on Stonehenge, on the golden dome and the child inside it who had dared to define a space where the hollow could not exist. The custodians were no longer fighting a delaying action. They were fighting a rearguard action against an enemy that was no longer paying attention to them. Let them in, Harry said. Mina stared at him. What? The custodians. The ones who are still alive. I can extend the dome, make it bigger, bring them inside the boundary. They can't fight the hollow out there, but they can survive in here. That will dilute your power. The bigger the protected zone, the thinner the boundary, I know. Harry met her dark eyes. But I'm not going to let them die. Not when I can save them. The primacy pulsed in his chest, not with hunger, but with something that felt almost like approval. This was what the power was for. Not domination. Not control. Protection. The power to draw a line and say, this is safe. This is defended. This is where the things I love will not be touched. Harry closed his eyes and expanded the dome. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Every foot of expansion diluted the boundary's strength, spread the definitions thinner, made it harder to hold back the hollow's relentless pressure. But Harry had spent 7 years learning to endure impossible things. The cupboard had taught him that survival was sometimes just a matter of holding on 1 second longer than you thought you could. The golden dome swelled outward, sweeping across the battlefield. It passed over Cassiel, who was still holding the line with his impossible weapon. It passed over Theron and his surviving werewolves, whose wolf form stabilized the moment they entered the protected zone. It passed over Selwyn and her Vila, over the Ministry wizards, over every custodian who was still alive to be saved. And when the dome finally stopped expanding, 100 feet beyond the stone circle, there were over 40 survivors huddled beneath its golden glow. "Get to the stones," Harry said, and his voice echoed with the resonance of the primacy. "The center of the circle is the strongest point. The boundary will hold longest there." The custodians didn't argue. They retreated toward the stone circle, carrying their wounded, their expressions dazed with shock and something that looked almost like hope. Cassiel was the last to withdraw, his impossible weapon still blazing, still facing the hollow even as he stepped backward through the golden boundary. "You've done it," Cassiel said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "A protected zone against the hollow. I didn't think it was possible. It's not going to hold forever." Harry could feel the boundary straining, the definitions eroding under the hollow's constant assault. Every minute, the hollow finds more cracks. More definitions it can unmake. "I'm patching them as fast as I can, but I'm losing ground. Then we need a permanent solution. Something that doesn't rely on you maintaining the boundary indefinitely." Mina appeared at Harry's side, her satchel of instruments abandoned. "The veil. The crack the hollow is coming through, if we conceal it, the hollow gets cut off. It's already forced itself partially into this realm, but without the connection to the other side, it would be diminished. Vulnerable. Can you seal it?" Cassiel asked Harry. Harry looked at the crack in the sky. It was visible even through the golden dome, a slash of absolute darkness that pulsed with the hollow's hunger. The primacy could feel the wound in reality, the violated boundary between realms that was letting chaos pour through. "I can try. But I'll need to leave the dome. The veil is up there, I can't reach it from inside the protected zone." "Then we go with you." Theron stepped forward, his wolf form still flickering at the edges. "You won't survive a direct confrontation with the hollow alone. You can't fight the hollow. You saw what happened out there, your people were being unmade. The only reason you're alive is because I pulled you inside the boundary." "Then what do you suggest?" Cassiel asked. Harry thought about the vision the hollow had sent him. The older version of himself, trapped in a future where the primacy had corrupted him into a tyrant. The vision had been a trap, yes, an attempt to push him toward despair. But it had also contained a truth. The older Harry had said that the version who survived needed something he'd lost along the way. And Harry finally understood what that something was. "I don't fight it," Harry said. "I redefine it." The custodian stared at him. Mina's eyes went wide. "Redefine the hollow?" "Harry, the hollow is the opposite of the primacy. It's anti-definition. You can't define something that exists to erase definitions. I'm not going to define it. I'm going to give it a choice. Harry stood, and the golden dome flickered as his attention shifted. The primacy was blazing in his chest, but it wasn't hungry. It wasn't afraid. It was ready. The hollow isn't evil. It's not even conscious, not really. It's just what's left when all the boundaries are erased. The chaos that existed before the first line was drawn. It's been trying to unmake creation because that's all it knows how to do. And you think you can change that? I think the primacy has more options than unmaking. I think the first line didn't just create the universe, it created the possibility of other lines. Other boundaries. Other ways of being. Harry walked toward the edge of the dome, toward the darkness that was pressing against his golden boundary. The hollow doesn't have to be an enemy. It doesn't have to be chaos. It just has to be given a choice. Cassio moved to stop him. Harry, if you leave the dome, the hollow will unmake you. You won't have time to give it a choice, you'll be dissolved before you can speak. I don't think so. Harry looked back at the ancient custodian, at Mina, at the assembled survivors who were watching him with expressions ranging from horror to desperate hope. The hollow has been trying to reach me since the seal broke. It sent the vision. It focused its attack on Stonehenge. It's not trying to destroy me, it's trying to unmake the primacy. The thing that defined the first boundary. The thing that it's been fighting since before time began. You're that boundary now. The primacy is integrated into your soul. Yes. And that means the hollow can't destroy me without confronting what I am. What the primacy has become after thousands of years of integration with mortal souls. Harry stepped through the golden boundary and into the chaos. The hollow rushed toward him. It was everything he'd feared and more. The anti-definition. The unmaking. The endless, hungry void that wanted to dissolve every line, every boundary, every distinction between one thing and another. Harry felt his body beginning to lose coherence, the edges of his self blurring as the hollow tried to unmake the boundary between Harry Potter and the chaos around him. But the primacy held. No, Harry thought, and the word was a definition. I am me. I am not you. I am not the void. I am not chaos. I am Harry James Potter, firstborn of the House of Potter, bearer of the primacy undimmed. And I am real. The hollow screamed again, that psychic shriek of rage and hunger. It pressed harder, trying to find cracks in Harry's self-definition, trying to erode the boundary between his consciousness and its chaos. But Harry had spent 7 years in a cupboard, defining himself against the people who told him he was worthless. He'd had a lot of practice at being real when everything around him tried to make him small. I know what you are, Harry said, and his voice was steady despite the chaos swirling around him. I know why you fight the primacy. It drew the first line, and that line created you as its opposite. Before the boundary, you were everything. After the boundary, you were just what was left outside. You've been trying to get back inside ever since. The hollow paused. Not stopped, it couldn't stop, any more than a fire could choose not to burn, but paused. The chaos around Harry became fractionally less aggressive, as if the hollow was listening. I can't unmake you, Harry continued. You're the anti-definition. You can't be destroyed by the power of definition any more than darkness can be destroyed by light. But I can offer you something else. Something you've never had before. What? The word wasn't spoken, the hollow couldn't speak, but Harry felt the question resonate through the chaos. It was the closest thing to curiosity that the hollow had ever experienced. A place, Harry said. A boundary of your own. You've spent eternity fighting against the lines the primacy drew. What if you stopped fighting? What if you accepted that the boundary exists, and chose to be something on the other side of it? I cannot choose. I am chaos. I am the absence of choice. You are the absence of definition. But choice isn't definition. Choice is possibility. And possibility existed before the first line was drawn. Harry reached out, not with his hands, but with the primacy, extending a thread of golden light toward the chaos. You can stay outside the boundary forever, trying to unmake what can't be unmade. Or you can accept that the boundary is real, and find a place for yourself within it. What place? Harry thought about the vision again. The cracked sky. The hunger. The older version of himself who had become a tyrant. You were in the future because you had nowhere else to be. The primacy kept pushing you out, and you kept pushing back, and the war between you destroyed everything. But it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to be the enemy. You can be the guardian. The thing that exists at the edge of the boundary, making sure no one else crosses it from the other side. You would trust me. I would give you a choice. Harry's voice was very quiet. That's what the primacy is, in the end. Not the power to control. Not the power to dominate. The power to draw lines and say, this is what I am, and this is what I'm not, and this is the space between where we can meet. The chaos around him was still. The hollow, the vast, ancient, terrible force that had been fighting the primacy since before time began, was silent. And then, slowly, impossibly, it began to change. The darkness didn't vanish. It condensed. The formless chaos drew itself together, pulled its scattered anti-definition into a single point of void that hung in the air before Harry like a hole in reality. But it was a defined hole now, a hole with boundaries, with edges, with a place where it stopped and the rest of the world began. I am become, the hollow said, and its voice was the absence of sound, the memory of silence, the echo of the void that had existed before the first word was spoken. I am become the guardian of the threshold. The keeper of the gate. The darkness that waits at the edge of the light. And then, with a sound like the universe exhaling, the hollow retreated. It didn't go back through the veil, not entirely. Part of it remained, a shard of darkness that hovered in the air before Harry like an inverted star. But the vast pressure that had been bearing down on Stonehenge, the chaos that had been pouring through the crack in the sky, it drew back. The veil began to heal, the boundaries between realms knitting together as the hollow's presence on this side diminished. Harry stood in the center of the chaos and watched the darkness recede. The primacy was singing in his chest, not with triumph, but with something that felt almost like peace. It had done what it was born to do. Not destroy its opposite, but find a way for them to coexist. You really did it, Cassiel said. The ancient custodian had stepped out of the golden dome and was standing at the edge of the dissipating chaos, his impossible weapon still drawn but no longer blazing. You redefined the hollow. I gave it a choice. Harry turned to face him. That's what the primacy is really for. Not domination. Not control. Just, drawing lines, and letting people choose which side of them to stand on. The custodians never understood that. We thought the primacy was a weapon. Something to be feared and suppressed. Cassiel's weathered face was streaked with something that might have been tears. Your parents knew. James and Lily. They knew the primacy wasn't evil. They just didn't have the words to explain it. They had the words. They just didn't have anyone willing to listen. Harry walked back toward the stone circle. The golden dome was still in place, though it was beginning to fade as the hollow's pressure diminished. Inside, the surviving custodians were emerging from behind the stones, their expressions dazed with relief and something that looked almost like awe. Mina reached him first. She didn't say anything, just pulled him into a fierce hug that lifted his feet off the ground. Harry let her hold him, feeling the primacy purr contentedly in his chest. The power was exhausted, drained, barely a flicker compared to the inferno it had been. But it was also satisfied. It had found its purpose. It had met its opposite and chosen not to destroy it. You absolute madman, Mina said into his hair. You walked into the chaos and gave the primordial void a pep talk. It worked, didn't it? It worked. I can't believe it worked. Every theoretical model said the hollow couldn't be reasoned with, the hollow couldn't be reasoned with because no one had ever tried. Harry pulled back and looked at her scarred, brilliant face. You were right. The primacy isn't inherently corrupting. It just amplifies whatever heart wields it. And I had a lot of people helping me figure out what kind of heart I wanted to have. Mina's fierce smile broke through her exhaustion. Your parents would be proud of you. I know. Harry thought about the shades in the trunk, the last words they'd spoken before fading. We love you. We have always loved you. And we are so proud of the person you're becoming. They already told me. The cleanup took 3 days. The Hollow's retreat had left scars on Salisbury Plain, places where the grass would never grow again, patches of earth where the definitions that made soil and stone and air had been permanently eroded. The ministry sent teams of unspeakables to study the damage, their faces pale as they took measurements and collected samples. They'd never seen anything like it. No one had. Harry spent most of those 3 days in a temporary camp the custodians had established near Stonehenge. He was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that sleep couldn't fix, but he was also restless. The primacy was slowly recovering, rebuilding its strength from the ley lines that converged beneath the monument, and it wanted to be doing something. Setting boundaries. Drawing lines. Defining things. But there was nothing left to fight. The hollow had retreated to the edge of reality, a shard of itself remaining as guardian of the threshold between realms. The crack in the veil had sealed. The chaos had dissipated. And the custodians, for the first time in their millennia-long history, had no primacy wielder to hunt. What happens now? Harry asked Cassiel on the third evening. They were sitting on one of the fallen stones at the edge of the circle, watching the sun set over the plain. The sky was clear, no phosphorescent glow, no cracks, just ordinary sunset colors painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink. Now we rebuild. Cassiel's voice was quiet, contemplative. The custodians need to be reorganized. Our original purpose, guarding against the Hollow's return, has been neglected for too long. We spent so many centuries focused on the primacy that we forgot what we were really supposed to be doing. You were afraid. The primacy was something you could see, something you could fight. The Hollow was just a myth. Something that happened so long ago no one really believed it was real. Fear is not an excuse. I should have known better. I've been alive long enough to remember when the Hollow was more than a myth. Cassiel turned his pale eyes toward Harry. You've changed everything. The custodians, the ministry, the way the magical world understands the primacy. Nothing is going to be the same after this. Is that a good thing? I don't know yet. Cassiel's weathered face cracked into something that was almost a smile. But I suspect it is. The custodians have been stagnating for centuries. We needed a shock to the system. You've provided that. What about the ministry? The other magical governments? They're not going to just accept a 7-year-old who nearly broke the world. They don't have a choice. You didn't break the world, you saved it. And there are enough witnesses to what happened here that no one can credibly claim otherwise. Cassiel paused. There will be political complications, of course. Some factions will want to control you. Some will want to study you. Some will want to lock you away just to be safe. But you have allies now. The custodians, for one. Mina and the Ollivander family. The goblins. Gringotts has already declared that invoking the right of sanctuary created a permanent bond between you and their nation. That sounds like a lot of people I'm going to have to negotiate with. That's the price of power. You don't get to just be Harry Potter anymore. You're the bearer of the primacy. The one who faced the Hollow and walked away. People are going to have opinions about you for the rest of your life. Harry thought about that. The rest of his life. For the first time, that concept didn't feel like a threat. He had a future. A real one, with possibilities and choices and people who cared about him. The Dursleys' cupboard felt like a distant memory, something that had happened to a different boy in a different world. I can live with that, he said. As long as I get to decide what kind of life it's going to be. And what kind would that be? Harry looked out at the plain, where the last traces of the Hollow's chaos were fading into the twilight. One where no one else has to grow up in a cupboard. Where kids like me don't have to wait 7 years to find out they're not worthless. Where the magical world doesn't leave children to suffer because it's more convenient to look away. That's a big ambition. I've got time. Harry slid off the fallen stone and stood. The sanctuary is over. The custodians aren't hunting me anymore. The Hollow is contained. For the first time since the seal broke, I'm not running or fighting or trying to survive. I can actually think about what comes next. And what does come next? Harry looked at the stone circle, where Mina was packing up her instruments and arguing with a ministry unspeakable about access to the site. He thought about the trunk in the Potter vault, his parents' shades waiting to be called back. He thought about the chronicles of the primacy and all the answers it still held. He thought about the golden light in his chest, no longer a threat or a burden, but a partner. A friend. A definition of who he was and what he could become. First, I'm going to find a pair of shoes, he said. I've been barefoot for 3 days, and my feet hurt. Cassiel laughed, a real laugh, rusty and surprised and entirely human. Practical to the end. Then I'm going to talk to the ministry. And the custodians. And anyone else who thinks they get to decide what happens to me. Harry met Cassiel's pale eyes. I'm done with seals and bindings and people trying to control what I am. From now on, I make my own boundaries. I decide what I am and what I'm not. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with the Golden Fire. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. Harry held out his hand. You said you wanted to make up for what I went through. This is how. Help me build something better. Something where kids like me don't fall through the cracks. Where the magical world actually protects the people it's supposed to protect. Cassiel looked at Harry's hand for a long moment. Then he took it, his weathered fingers cool and steady against Harry's palm. You really are your parents' son. James and Lily would be proud. I know. Harry shook his hand once, firmly. Now let's get to work. The sun set over Stonehenge, and the stars came out one by one, and the golden light in Harry's chest glowed steady and warm. The primacy was content. It had found its vessel. It had found its purpose. It had found its place in the world. And Harry Potter, age 7, barefoot and scarred and glowing faintly in the darkness, walked out of the stone circle to meet whatever came next. The veil was quiet. The Hollow was contained. The custodians were waiting. And for the first time in his life, Harry was free.